This is CNN Breaking News.
This breaking news now, the progressive wave falls in purple Wisconsin and the establishment strikes back. Good morning, everybody. I'm Audie Cornish, and we're going to start with that Wisconsin Democratic primary for governor because the race was called just a short time ago. CNN projects moderate David Crowley will defeat Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong heading into this general election in November.
No matter who wins this primary, we're going to continue to fight for each other. We are going to collectively reject despair, and we are going to unite.
So Hong was hoping to ride the progressive wave. She did fall short. Was it the cancel Thanksgiving socialist thing? Was it all too far left for the Midwest?
I don't think northern Wisconsin's ready for it.
My view is a centrist or more centrist candidate can reach out more broadly. I don't think polarity at its extreme is good for our country.
I think it's really important that electability is part of it, but at the same time, I want to vote for who I think is going to make change in our community.
Joining me now in the group chat, Nicholas Wu, congressional reporter at Semaphore, Karine Hajar, Washington Post editorial board member, and Josh Orden, president for Demand Justice. Now, I want to start with you, Nicholas. What did you see in this, what do we call it, the Rust Belt, the Blue Wall? Like, what are we learning from last night?
You know, I'll put my Midwesterner hat on.
They love when we do that,
easy
by the way.
characterization.
Yeah, they're excited. They're excited. We know you want this.
Yeah. I think, what we saw last night was Democratic primary voters really picking electability when it mattered in the state. In Wisconsin, we saw them pick the candidate who, by all accounts, is the more centrist one, maybe would fare better in a general election. But the counterpoint to that is Minnesota, where voters there picked the more progressive Senate candidate,
right,
Peggy Flanagan, over Angie Craig, the more centrist House member who was running for Senate. But that's a much bluer state, so perhaps the electability argument just didn't work as well.
Exactly. One of the things that I'm interested in, Josh, because you've worked for both Kamala Harris, a person who is known for being maybe too cautious, right? Like not known necessarily for their retail politics and style, and then also Bernie Sanders, who is still out there now at this point trying to play kingmaker. What do you make of how voters are talking about this?
I think that what we're seeing is progressive candidates winning when they are strong candidates, when they're running strong races, and when they take on power. And I think we saw that with Peggy Flanagan. I think we saw it in Michigan with Abdul El-Sayed. And I think, frankly, we're going to see it with Brian Poindexter in his race against Max Miller, because it's, when we run working people who are taking on the powers that be, that are taking on corporate greed, I think Democrats and progressives do very well.
Yeah, and then Bernie Sanders didn't back Francesca Hong, and Democrats have been squawking left and right. One operative telling Politico she just doesn't have the Zoran ability to sort of laugh it off or pitch it effectively. The former chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party saying this is not the year to test a Democratic Socialist. This isn't New York. And David Axelrod hitting her with El-Sayed is a serious person. She is a font of zany liberal faculty lounge exotica, the word from David Axelrod. Yeah, we were talking about this during the break, which is it's one thing to be talking within your activist community and in your primary, where this stuff actually, you get a lot of nods and snaps, right? Like she wasn't just sitting on a bench yelling stuff and suddenly ahead in the primary.
Yeah, and you saw, for example, in El-Sayed and just in the neighboring state that he was trying to seem more moderate. He was running what felt like a tighter, more serious race.
He's also run a bunch of times, so he's had a couple more practice.
And ultimately, politics comes down to perception, so I do think gauging someone less on the very specifics of their policy and more on the way that they interface with voters, more on the way that they're perceived. It didn't help that she had some tremendous gaffes going into the last week of the race. Not liking Thanksgiving is not quite a popular
But you're
policy.
right, because the last week is what matters. That's when Democrats got their act together and said, hey, you who dropped out, you come back. You know what I mean? And there was this, it was described as chaotic, no?
Yeah, extremely chaotic. We saw the number up on the screen. This, despite all of the noise, this was a race that was separated by 3,000 votes, which is an incredibly
It's
close
close,
margin,
yeah.
and speaks to how much this narrowed in the final days of the race, especially when polling, which by all accounts seems to have missed in a lot of Democratic primaries this season, had Hong ahead by as double digits in some surveys.
There was this, some of the centrists who, with the Welcome Pack, they told Politico this week, many Democratic primary voters may want to touch the hot stove, but the independents who can vote in Democratic primaries can turn out in large enough numbers to slap their hand away. Who did the slapping?
Well, I just think generally in Wisconsin, races come down to often 1 percentage point, even less than one. So, again, it's really hard to win. I mean, not only with zany policies like not liking Thanksgiving, but what does permanent affordability mean? This was a central claim.
Theory?
Yes,
Black
please.
voters, rural white voters. Right? This is what happens in Democratic primaries. This is how you get a Joe Biden coming out on top in South Carolina. I think that Michael Crowley did benefit from an energized black vote. We'll see if the numbers bear that out. But there's been a lot of talk about whether this left flank is understanding who's in the coalition and how to expand it. Well, can I let you finish? I didn't mean to interrupt. But that's my theory, that there's some people who are out there who are like, chill, we're not doing that.
Absolutely. And when you have states with large rural populations, too, polling has floundered in so many places across the country. So I think that's another issue.
Well, look, I think that there's going to be some finger wagging from the centrists here, thinking that their theory of the case was right all along. I would not put a lot of credence to that. I think that the candidates that show that they're really willing, ready, and able to take on power are doing very well, and the ones that voters perceive as not ready, willing, and able to take on power are not doing so well.
Well, here's what's different. I think, who did you mention who won over Angie?
Peggy Flanagan.
Peggy Flanagan. One of the things she was dealing with is the person she was competing against was actually took some hit on immigration in a state that's very much dealing with the issue. So it wasn't just saying like, oh, you're a moderate, we don't care about you. It was somebody who the voter had said, oh, you voted for the Lincoln-Riley Act. As Democrats, we are not into that, and they were punished for it, right? Is that different than the progressive winning, more than the moderate being punished?
Yeah, I think so. And also, I feel like too often, those of us in D.C. and those of us in politics think about these buckets or labels as centrist or lefty or Democrat or Republican. And I think people are much more in touch with how the political issues are touching their lives locally, and they go with a candidate who is more responsive to that. And I think that was true with Peggy Flanagan and in Michigan, and I think also will be true in Pennsylvania.
All right, we'll have more election results. They're coming in from overnight. For instance, in South Carolina, Senator Darlene Graham headed to a runoff. That means now this political novice may take the debate stage. Plus, there are high gas prices and low approval ratings embarrassed by Iran. Is Trump the new Jimmy Carter?
I'm hopeful that President Trump will come down, but we'll see. And there's a big distinction between myself and Ralph Norman.
The people of South Carolina need to know everything about where I stand and where she stands. And we will lay out those differences, which is a good thing.
So the race to replace the late Lindsey Graham in the U.S. Senate is heading to a runoff. Senator Darlene Graham took the top spot in the Republican primary for her brother's old seat, followed by Congressman Ralph Norman. The runoff happens in 2 weeks. Now, there are also plans to debate next week, depending on who you ask.
I know we're scheduled to debate for Monday. I look forward to getting in all the issues. I look forward to hearing what her plan is.
Are you participating in that debate? Have you agreed to that?
Well, that's the first I've heard of it, so we'll see.
Would you be willing to debate him?
I'll be willing to debate him, yes.
Group chat is back. We're going to get to the race, but I was surprised to hear her being like, this is the first I've heard of a thing that's happening in a few days. No, it's only because Graham was running, right, before he died. So there's an infrastructure of people there who are supposed to be like, to-do list, debate.
And debates are pretty standard practice in contested races, so.
Does it speak to her as a novice?
Say that again?
Does it speak to her as a novice in terms of actually running herself?
I mean, she is a novice, and so it's going to be a challenge for her. But she has, the late Senator Graham's infrastructure around her, so hopefully, she I'm sure she's getting the prep that he would have gotten, but it's going to be difficult. I mean, he had literally decades on the political stage to hone his own style, his policy points, and you're putting her up there after just mere a month or two. So that's going to be a challenge.
It was a short time for trying to get the voters to understand who you are. You know about short times coming from the Harris campaign. What more work does she have to do? I mean, if we're looking up these numbers, I was looking at Aaron Blake, one of our writers, and he was saying that that Graham coming up well shy of 50% would seem to risk another situation where supporters of the other candidate coalesce, especially given that there's been some hard feelings about her seemingly being gifted a Senate seat.
Yeah, I think, South Carolina probably has not seen a competitive debate in this particular seat for a long time. So I think people are probably stretching and feeling, getting their muscles ready. And I think the question will be whether or not she can put out a competing vision to Norman. And I think voters deserve to have that contrast. And I think it's a healthy thing for that particular seat. And given that neither candidate got over 50%, I think voters are going to appreciate it, and I will also see, it'll be interesting to see what contrasts both candidates decide to highlight in that debate.
Here's what Ralph Norman said on Tuesday, because there is the coveted pursuit of President Trump's endorsement. It seems like Darlene Graham has it. He encouraged her to be in the race, but here's how Norman is talking about that on the campaign trail.
Well, I asked for the president's endorsement, didn't get it. But anybody would want the endorsement, but he chose who he did, and that's fine. South Carolina's going to decide the next senator.
Norman has run before and come up short. He was able to take that same, infrastructure and put it to work here. But tell me about him. Is he in a position to overcome, Trump's displeasure?
Yeah, he has kind of the original sin in Trump's eyes of endorsing someone else in the 2024 presidential primary, and that was Nikki Haley, obviously home state, former governor there. But the question for this primary is whether that will matter in the end, since as we've talked about, that's 2/3 of the primary electorate who did not vote for kind of the nominal incumbent, the person endorsed by Trump. So we're really seeing the limitations of that endorsement in what, by all accounts, was a very compressed but wide open primary.
How do they even show how they're different? I mean, he was in the House Freedom Caucus, which isn't exactly in favor the same way it once was under what is now Trumpism. I mean, are there meaningful differences between these two candidates?
I mean, stylistically, Senator Graham doesn't really talk that much to reporters in the hall. She's not generating the same kinds of sound bites and moments that you might otherwise get as a candidate being in Congress. Whereas Ralph Norman, speaking as a Capitol Hill reporter, is someone who talks to a lot of folks. He's very quotable. He has been a fly in the ointment in the eyes of Republican leadership at times, and he gets himself in the mix, and that could help.
So after the break on This Morning, we're going to talk about one more thing, Trump's Patriot Games. Have you heard of this? Basically, we want to know whether this is a representation of America, this youth sports event, or maybe a kind of MAGA Olympics. We'll have more. And then I want to say good morning to our viewers in Chicago, because this is your skyline by the river as you are waking up.
I think for me, representing a state is a little bit different. As I grew up in Belgium, I have a different view on America, and I think I'm just more noticeable of the opportunities that we have here.
Two winners now crowned in President Trump's Patriot Games. The president promised the best of the best student athletes. I'm not sure that's what we got, but here's the president presenting the winners with their trophies, a slice of the $250,000 prize. Now, a CNN analysis actually found that a specific demographic of kids got a shot to compete. Of the ones who were featured in the Freedom 250 Instagram page, many attend private Christian schools. They also appear to be overwhelmingly white, and the application for the games didn't specify race.
These are supposedly the best athletes from every state in the country, and they all happen to be white? I don't know about that.
They're going on right now, the dystopian Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen type events in the Hunger Games for our high school athletes to go and compete to do what?
They get backpacks and like red and blue outfits, and then they're jumping around, hopping around, and doing sports.
They're playing dodgeball, they're playing tug of war. How does one person win those games?
As a person who has lost at dodgeball so many painful times, I can tell you there's a way. But the group chat is back. I don't want to make fun of these kids. The contestants range in age from 14 to 17. But here are the things people are raising questions about. Not selected through any qualifying events. They recorded video essays just sort of describing why they should be included. Some students were chosen to represent states where they don't even live. So, before we even get to the dodgeball and the tug of war of it all, help me understand, who is this for?
That's a great question. I mean, look, at the end of the day, this came across more as a Trump rally. I don't think that the idea of having some sort of sporting event for young American athletes is that crazy, especially around the 250th anniversary. I actually think it's a great idea. But this comes down to both, I think, poor execution of the event itself, and also some of the outrage around it has been a little silly too. I mean, at this point, really, there's plenty of criticism to be made about it, but I think that this has become sort of a farce because of both sides. One, it was poorly planned, but two, people were rooting for it to lose all along, and then you end up with the crowd that is very much self-selected based on their allegiance to the president.
Do you think that people felt this is something they could participate in, or did it feel like something that was for Trump and the community of voters that he feels supports him the most?
I feel like Trump was previously the reigning master of distraction. You know, we've got a war, raging in Iran. We have sky-high debt. We see people, not having the economy work for them.
Yeah.
And we have this kind of thing, which I think in previous Trump eras where he was a lot more popular, like UFC, would have gotten a lot of attention.
Look, this is giving UFC vibes. I mean, you do have those weird sparkler things. Got a lot of light going on. Everyone's wearing a medal, which is giving participation trophy. I don't know why. That feels not on brand ideologically. But it feels like so many students, so many young people, they're on Instagram. They have brands to manage. They're athletes. There's name, image, and likeness. There were a ton of athletes who could have been participating in this. And that just, in terms of rooting for it to fail, I think people who are into sports were like, this doesn't seem like it's about sports.
Well, I mean, when the events are not established sports that people usually go collegiate to go to a professional or collegiate level for, then yeah, it sort of becomes less about some type of,
Don't
lacrosse
act Kareen with your tug of war college thing. Okay?
I think this event will finally make sense when it's revealed in 6 months or so that every parent had to give $500,000 to the ballroom for their kid to participate.
We should say we do not know if that's a thing, but it's
I'm
not
saying
a surprise
that's what would make this make sense.
for things to be monetized politically, right?
Yeah, I mean, what this really speaks to the whole polarization of this moment. Like, had this been branded as, I don't know, say the presidential fitness games.
Oh,
or,
yeah, that would have been a good one.
Right, like we know that branding, that's nonpartisan.
Yeah, it's such a weird year. I feel like I don't see America 250 on things. No. Like, if you think back to the 70s, it was like commemorative plates and Wheaties boxes and all this stuff. And I kind of feel like brands are like, America seems nice, and I just don't see it anywhere. It's really like in these kind of White House and America 250 sponsored things, but I don't think it's an accident that like corporate America is not embracing celebrations
because it's been made about one man. And corporate America gets involved in things when their audience and when their customer base can all find it accessible and feels like it's for them. This has been made about one man, and one man who is the least popular president in modern American history. And so I think corporate America, and the reason that people can't sort of embrace it and share it is because he's made it not about them. He's made it about himself.
Yeah, and we should say it's going to be on ABC and ESPN. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I mean like the broader culture. There's not this sense of everywhere you look, we're in America's 250.
Well, I totally agree that Trump has made a lot of America 250 about himself. But the polarization when it comes to, we're talking about patriotism itself. That's happening on both sides. Trump is using this event and this momentous occasion, and frankly, in a lot of rally instances for himself. But you also have voices on the left that have more and more predominantly demonize the American experiment, American exceptionalism.
You mean the history part, not this year's
history part, not necessarily this year, but I'm sure that there are plenty out there who don't care to celebrate at all.
Yeah, well, I think the real test will be when it's on TV, right? And we start seeing those comments roll in from the sports world because they love to comment on things. And ratings, yeah. So I'm very curious. Straight ahead on CNN this morning, we are going to go back to the story of the whole switching of planes, right? Did the president put American lives, including those of his Secretary of State, at risk when he got away on a secret jet out of Turkey? And today, watch as darkness descends on countries around the globe. Join Boris Sanchez and Brianna Keilar for special live coverage, the total solar eclipse Wednesday at 1 Eastern on CNN and also on the CNN app. So President Trump confirms the report of a secret plane swap in Turkey last month because of a threat from Iran. But he left his Secretary of State and Treasury Secretary behind.
It was really as per the military, and I just have to do what they say. They go for safety, and I have to do what they say.
Why was it too dangerous for you to fly on Air Force One, but
well,
not
I don't
too
know.
dangerous
I
for the
think
plane?
actually the plane that I flew on was at greater risk. I think it was at greater risk because that would be the plane I think that they would be more likely to go for.
The plane that no one knew he was on. Because here's the thing. This ruse at this point, people can identify on video. The Secret Service hid the president inside a catering truck.
It was a bait and switch. He put people in harm's way to save himself. That's who Donald Trump is.
Okay, group chat is back. We have two takes here. One person, J.B. Pritzker, who has been a good sort of foil for Trump, willing to speak publicly on the national stage, saying, you know, you leave behind the Treasury Secretary and the Secretary of State and more than 100 people, frankly, like staffers as well as press, and maybe that's saying something about you. And Trump saying, look, I got to do what the security requires. What do you make of how Pritzker framed this?
I mean, I think it doesn't. The problem here, I think, for Trump is that it doesn't pass the ridiculous test, right? Obviously, the president's safety is of utmost priority, right? And it's important that the Secret Service keep them safe. That being said, if they propose a plan to the president that seems ridiculous, a president can always say, I'm not doing that, figure something else out. And I think what we saw here is sort of Trump being the most elemental Trump he could be, which is that he doesn't really care about anyone else. I think he figured that the optics would never be exposed and this would remain a secret. But I think the image of him sort of crouching on a catering truck, you know, at the expense of the safety of everyone else is not a good one, and I think Pritzker has a point.
People were trying to ask questions of Marco Rubio about this, the Secretary of State and many other jobs. Here he is.
Mr. Secretary, did you put Americans at risk by having them fly in Air Force One when it was under threat? How persistent is that threat to the president?
He has a lot of jobs.
He sure does.
I wish he was on the catering truck as well, just theoretically. But talk about this take.
Look, I think I agree that this called for more introspection, but it's also consistent with the level of introspection we've seen from this president. Does it seem plausible that he was told to do this by security and he just did it? Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think that the big mistake here was that the media and others were not briefed before opting into this. Apparently, they
were told to bring down the shades, just no reason.
Yeah, and it seems like there were no other details. Look, these types of switcheroos have happened before. I saw, you know, President Clinton in 2000 also, there was a similar sort of switcheroo. But I believe in that instance, the media and those on the plane were briefed. So that
do you think the issue is that they kept obfuscating every step of the way? So why are you switching planes? Obfuscation. Once you get back, hey, what happened to the other plane? Well, actually, there was a decoy. Well, actually, see that truck in the picture, it's something else. Well, actually. And at a certain point, you're drawing in more questions with the lack of explanation.
Yeah, I mean, what this whole storyline really speaks to is the overall trust deficit in a lot of ways that we've seen between.
Did you say trust deficit?
Yeah, between the media and the administration on the war and the way it's been conducted. Like, you know, in many ways this appears to have been in line with the relative level of disclosure the administration has given about the war, and this is something that fits a lot of folks' priors on that.
It just adds to the ridiculousness that this administration, I mean, if the president thinks his life is constantly at risk, and we know that there have been Iranian threats on the president's life.
And multiple actual assassination attempts. I mean, that's my thing. I kind of feel like if I've had multiple assassination attempts and someone says, get in this truck, I get in the truck. I'm not necessarily like, should you ground the other plane? Let's have a logistics meeting about this. Like, I actually am not sure I totally agree with the sort of panic about this.
Yeah. Well, but also remember, we don't really know at the base of this how much the fact that he took a plane from the Qataris that was not fully prepared to carry the president factors into this.
This plane is a pain.
He started a war. He started a war of choice in the country next door to the one he was departing from, and he couldn't take the plane that he corruptly took from the Qataris because they rushed it. He couldn't be patient enough for the next plane. And so at the end of this, we don't really know what was behind it, but they have not explained whether or not this corrupt deal plays a part in any way.
Okay. Next on CNN this morning, we're going to get you up to date on the election. The centrist Dems are claiming the win is Wisconsin, and I'm going to talk to a congresswoman who endorsed the winning candidate. Was this the wake-up call that the party needed? Plus, the Minnesota candidate trying to take her career from the NFL sidelines to front row seat in the U.S. Senate. Breaking news overnight, David Crowley projected to win the Democratic nomination for governor in Wisconsin. And we managed to hold off Democratic Socialist lawmaker Francesca Hong, but it was by just a few thousand votes. It's a fitting end to a primary which has seen several turns. 3 candidates dropped out, including Crowley, before he then re-entered the race and ultimately won. Democratic voters say the process itself should be a warning to the party.
I think the Democrats got to figure it out. And I'm very progressive. I vote a lot on the Democratic side. They got a lot of work to do.
I hope this is a wake-up call for the party, the Democratic Party, that they need to go back and look at what actually everyday people, normal people, are actually expecting and wanting.
Joining me now, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, a Democrat from Wisconsin who endorsed Crowley. Congresswoman, thank you for being here and congratulations. I know you also won your primary last night against a progressive candidate. When you hear those voters say things like, hey, this is a wake-up call, was that your lesson? Do you feel like this was a wake-up call for you?
Well, good morning. And first of all, I'm a progressive as well. And David Crowley is a progressive as well. I think that we are terrified of how Republicans define us. And Francesca Hong decided to call herself a Democratic Socialist, and that the Republicans sort of want to use that jargon as a cudgel to prevent Democratic voters from supporting in the general election that candidate. I just want to say that Francesca Hong ran an absolutely splendid campaign, and she did focus on things that are on people's minds, which is why she received so many votes. Affordability.
But can I stop you there? I want to be clear. Did you endorse Crowley?
I most certainly did endorse David Crowley.
So you're saying good things about Francesca. What is it that led you to say not just that Francesca Hong was pretty good, but to call back somebody, right, who had dropped out of the race? You endorsed someone who had to come back and run against her.
Well, you know, it was a very awkward primary, but in the long run, I agree with the governor that David Crowley was the person with the most managerial experience plus legislative experience. And Francesca absolutely ran a good campaign. I think there were volunteers from not only this state, but all over the region that came and did boots on the ground. And I think the governor decided to intervene because we do want the strongest candidate to stand up with Tom Tiffany.
I want to maybe say the quiet part out loud here. Do you think some of these candidates are underestimating the power of black voters in these primaries?
Well, I don't want to say that people are underestimating the power of black voters, but I do want to remind everybody that they stayed up all night long waiting on the part of the state where black people live, Milwaukee, counts to come in. I think that nobody takes black votes for granted, only to their peril that they do. And I think that David Crowley is going to give us yet another opportunity to demonstrate to the people of Wisconsin that that race should not be a disqualifier for running statewide office. The governor in the past several days has gone from one part of the state to the next, introducing David Crowley to Wisconsinites. And I think that because David Crowley was at like 5 or 6% at the point at which he got back into the race. And I do think that our governor is, his approval rating is into the 60 percentile. And so I do think that that was very, very helpful that the governor decided to intervene because we did have great candidates. Not only Francesca Hong, but there were 2 lieutenant governors who ran. There was a state senator who ran, and a gentleman who actually was in the Evers administration and with the Department of Administration. So we had a really good field. I think there were too many people in the Democratic primary. It was very difficult for them to differentiate themselves.
Yeah.
But I do think that the governor's endorsement helped to create that separation.
Okay, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, thank you so much for your time.
And thank you.
I'm going to turn to one other candidate, Michelle Tafoya, trying to take her career from the NFL sidelines to a front row seat in the U.S. Senate. So this former sports reporter captured 52% of the vote last night, easily defeating former Navy SEAL Adam Swartz in Minnesota's Republican primary. Now she's going to face Democratic Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan in November. Now, in a victory tweet last night, Tafoya vowed to fight fraud and bring common sense back to Washington, and Flanagan is already attacking her.
Michelle Tafoya was all in with Trump when ICE was terrorizing our neighbors. She even said ICE treated children really, really well.
Group chat is back. In this state, immigration is the flashpoint, okay? They had to endure the operation that ICE did there where 2 people lost their lives, 2 U.S. citizens in particular. How do you see how Tafoya is trying to have the conversation around it, or is this something she's up against?
This is something that we're seeing from Republican candidates across the country, and that's trying to focus on more local issues in the states and trying to avoid these headwinds that will dog Republicans everywhere, from prices to ICE. And in Minnesota in particular, we saw how salient the ICE issue is. You know, Peggy Flanagan perhaps won this primary because she hit Angie Craig for her votes on immigration earlier in the at the beginning of the administration.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is something that you know, it could be a competitive race, but by all accounts, it's a blue-leaning state.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, here is Tafoya's campaign ad on a football field, of course, just to give you a sense of how she is selling herself to voters.
For years, I covered the biggest football games in America. I walked the sidelines when the pressure was mounting and the stakes were the highest. That job taught me about more than football. It taught me about how leadership really works.
I see snow, I see a football field, we're good, right? Like, help me understand what makes her a strong candidate.
I mean, look, she does have serious name brand. People know her face, people know her name. And that makes this, in a way, more competitive for Republicans than Minnesota is used to in Senate races. I don't think there's been a Republican senator since the early 2000s for the state. Now, I think absolutely immigration is going to galvanize voters on the left. That's not only happening in Minnesota, it's happening in Maine, it's happening in other places where you've had really combative ICE operations.
And even on the right, it's forced people to take a stand because they're seeing it in their streets physically.
Absolutely. But she is also running as the anti-fraud candidate, and that is a big issue in Minnesota. It might not play as much in more liberal parts of the state that will look more to immigration, but it very well might play in the more rural parts of the state. So it'll be interesting to see those issues head to head.
Okay, I want to turn to something else, Josh, that I know you're going to like. Turns out war and economic pain might not be good for your presidential legacy. Is President Trump becoming like the one president he swore he'd never be?
Donald Trump is about to become what he never, ever wanted to be, Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
He is being held hostage by Iran. They are holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage. As a result, they're holding the world economy hostage, and it's focused at Donald Trump. And I know from talking to him over the last 24 years, the one person he would never want to be is Jimmy Carter.
I talked to him about Jimmy Carter, too.
And
yeah.
so and here we are, and it was all voluntary.
That's the point, right? Jimmy Carter had the situation foisted upon him when he was president that didn't go well, that hung around his neck. Donald Trump, in a midterm election year, went to a war of choice that generations of presidents before him rejected, with a country that had essentially an unwinnable outcome, and that could basically pull a lever whenever they wanted to inflict economic pain on the American middle class.
But international events don't care about the midterms. Do you know what I mean? Like this decision, which was joint with Israel, is a decision that he made as president. Is it looking, though, the way Chris Christie said, that Trump is hostage to the situation? That's the part of the analogy that kind of surprised me to hear Christie say that.
He's sort of choosing to be, I mean, he wasn't willing to do what it would take to achieve his original objectives. And so now he's in a situation where the president has this fixation with a deal, but you can't really make a good faith deal with a fanatical regime like the Iranian regime. And so the choice that the president should make is pretty clear here. It's containment. He should walk away from full-scale conflict and also full-scale negotiation, but he has a really effective blockade in place. It's inflicting great pain and pressure on the Iranians. And ultimately, pain and pressure is the only thing that this regime responds to, because that's what had worked in Trump 1 for the president, too. So I don't really understand the mentality.
What you're saying is something Trump is saying, and I want to play this for you. This was him on Tuesday talking about, hey, this is the position I'm in Iran.
I'm the last person to trust Iran. They've lied to me constantly. We have total control over the Hormuz Strait right now. They don't have control. We have total control. We own it. And at some point, maybe they'll do something and then they get blown away. But right now, we're in a very good position.
Is that the consensus?
Okay, do you remember the movie Groundhog Day?
Okay.
This is the Groundhog Day war. We bombed Iran to eliminate their nuclear weapons, only to have to come back months later to bomb Iran to eliminate their nuclear weapons. We took out the radical Al-Khomeini, only to have him replaced by the more radical Al-Khomeini. We tried to open and fought to open the Strait of Hormuz, only to now be fighting to open the Strait of Hormuz. This is the idea that the Republican administration is saying to voters in this midterm that prices will go down as soon as this war is over, is like people telling Bill Murray that this will end as soon as you go to sleep. It's not going to happen before November.
Let me get back to the Jimmy Carter of it all, because ironically, we were talking about America 250. That was also during a time when we were celebrating America's birthday. We were also worried about inflation. We were also worried about gas prices. And Trump, you know, he likes talking about that period of history. Here he is talking about Carter on a couple different occasions in June.
I remember Jimmy Carter had some bad problems in Iran with the hostages. I don't want to ever put our people in that kind of danger.
At this point, do you need a deal with Iran to go get it? Or have you thought about just a covert, daring, send in the SEALs, send in the Rangers?
But I didn't want to be Jimmy Carter, you know. I didn't feel like being Jimmy Carter.
You're amused.
Well, the president keeps choosing the fail in this situation. Again, maximum pressure can work on the Iranians if you choose for that to be your objective. He started this war with objectives that I mean, you have to know from the beginning how far you're willing to go. Yeah. He was not willing to go to the level that it would take to precipitate regime change in the short run, to fully destroy the regime. So now you're left with the situation where the president wants to frame it as a deal, a win. He fluctuates on the language, but ultimately he's fixated on a deal. You can't do that with this regime. So reorient.
Well, right now
talk about
he
pressure.
isn't able to say that he has the Strait of Hormuz is clear. I know he said it there, but if that was true, ships would be going through.
Right.
And it's not clear he's going to get a nuclear deal. Why does Jimmy Carter live rent-free in his head?
That's a good question, and it seems the overall sentiment right now could you could draw some parallels to Jimmy Carter and the idea of malaise and during his presidency, the sense that yes, the president dogged by inflation and high gas prices and yet another crisis in Iran. And this is something that Trump is perhaps someone who is obsessed with the 70s and 80s in a lot of ways, has chosen to fixate on.
Okay, and Chris Christie drawing a line under it. That's what's in his group chat. I want to ask what is in yours. Nicholas, what are you thinking about midweek?
Everything about the Odyssey has been in my group chat.
Hey!
The score was great. Was the horse a war crime? There are many questions.
Was the Trojan horse a war crime? Is a take. Okay.
I saw my first bald eagle this weekend.
You did?
I was in Minnesota, and it felt very appropriate for the 250th. And I was informed by Minnesota natives that this wasn't actually, that this was a pretty common occurrence, but I shed a single tear when I saw the eagle. Yes.
You were over it? This reminds me, I was just looking in the paper this morning. There's this bird, this bald eagle named Jackie that died, I guess, in California.
So sad.
Soar-free, Jackie, soar-free. Okay, Josh.
I have a sort of you heard it here first moment. The president just elevated his staff secretary, Will Scharf, to become a White House counsel.
Okay.
I'm predicting that the next time there's a Supreme Court vacancy, and we track this at Demand Justice, that he's going to nominate Will Scharf to be the next Supreme Court justice because he doesn't want someone who's well-credentialed. He doesn't want someone smart. He wants someone that is loyal to him, and Will Scharf is loyal to him.
I hear your view. What are his actual credentials? Like, legally, is he somebody who's like, a former judge at so-and-so? Like,
I'm sorry, is that a question you think the president is asking? He ran for Missouri AG and lost in the primary.
Okay. All right. There we are. Okay, you guys, we have a lot of election results for you today. We are talking about races in Minnesota. We're talking about races in Wisconsin. And the one you are probably wondering about is that race between the Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong and Michael Crowley, a person who started in the race, came up short, and then was recruited to come back in. And it's looking now, we have called this race for David Crowley, and you can see how narrow that win is. So fundamentally, the conversation about progressives versus moderates and this conversation in the Democratic Party, it's still on, because it's not clear out of last night that there's been some sort of definitive decision in terms of the embrace of democratic socialism. We are also very much following the race in South Carolina. It's headed to a runoff. That's the Senate Republican special primary to fill the seat that Lindsey Graham left behind. His sister Darlene earned the endorsement of President Trump. And right now, she is ahead in that race. We're going to have the details for you later today as we find out what's next in South Carolina. I'm Audie Cornish, and the headlines are next. Thanks for being with us.
Breaking just a short time ago, the establishment strikes back. A huge upset in the Wisconsin governor primary by a razor-thin margin. Oh, this was close. So what are the lessons that were learned there? Also breaking overnight, the president's first comments about the elaborate ruse to protect him from an Iranian threat to Air Force One escaping through a catering truck. We've got new CNN reporting on who he left on the decoy plane.
And from the Midwest to the Ohio Valley, we're tracking deadly, powerful storms. Wind so strong, you got to see this. Look at that. They tossed a car like a toy on the interstate, and there's more flooding in the forecast today. Kate is out today. I'm Sarah Seidner in Atlanta with John Berman, who is in New York. I miss him already. This is CNN News Central.
And the breaking news this morning, oh, this was close and a huge upset. David Crowley A Milwaukee City Councilman upset Francesca Hong from Madison, Wisconsin. She is the progressive Democratic Socialist candidate. He upset her in the Wisconsin Democratic primary. She had been ahead in all kinds of polling leading up to the race, including, incidentally, David Crowley's own internal polls, and she'd been up by a lot. But look at this. Look at the margin we see right here. 3,211 votes separating the two candidates. He edged her out by the tiniest margin. I will say there was a period of time after 11 p.m. last night that she was actually ahead by several hundred votes. It kept on swinging back and forth, but we were able to project a winner in this case just a few hours ago. If you do look at the map here, you can see a little bit of a story. You can see Francesca Hong did very well anywhere there's a city, almost, right? City, 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 city. But David Crowley did well in all these rural areas, and there are a lot of rural counties here, also some of the suburban counties, and the one city he did well in was the city of Milwaukee, where he lives. You can see, again, this was close, but he was able to win by about a 2,500 vote margin, which wasn't much less than the margin for him in the entire state. Again, this was such a closely watched race because it pitted the left of the party, Francesca Hong. She'd been criticized for comments she had made about Thanksgiving, against someone seen as a more centrist candidate. So this is seen as a defeat for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But it was not all bad for them last night. We're going to go over to Minnesota here and look at the Senate race there. And you can see it was a blowout for the candidate seen as more progressive here. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan crushed Congresswoman Angie Craig, winning by almost 20 points there, well over 100,000 votes. This was a victory for progressives, so a little bit of a split decision overnight in the internal fighting in the Democratic Party. But the headline absolutely is Wisconsin. We'll go back to the governor's race there because this was an upset. This is something that has given the establishment a sigh of relief this morning. Let's get right to Jeff Zeleny, who is live in Madison, Wisconsin. And Jeff, you and I have covered a lot of races, but we keep seeing things we've really never seen before. This was a huge come-from-behind victory, and this was close all night long.
John, good morning. We have never seen anything like this before. 1 month ago, David Crowley was out of this race. He suspended his campaign on July 8th for 10 days. But what happened in that 10-day period would obviously change the race. The lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, Sarah Rodriguez, dropped out of this campaign. Mandela Barnes, a former lieutenant governor, dropped out as well. Crowley got back in and roared back to a remarkable comeback last evening. As you were showing those results, there's no doubt that Francesca Hong was very strong in some college areas, a lot of those cities across Wisconsin. However, here in Dane County, in Madison, she also won this county, but David Crowley was also quite strong. That contributed to his victory as well. And as we talked to so many voters as they were casting their ballots, they liked Francesca Hong. They liked her call for change and this progressive strain of politics that has run through Wisconsin Democrats for years and years, more than a century, going back to fighting Bob La Follette. But there was also deep concern about whether she could win in November. The questions of electability here, John, were more pronounced than I have ever heard them. So we do know now that David Crowley will be accepting this victory in a speech in Milwaukee in just a couple hours. But the governor of the state of Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers, he campaigned at Crowley's side and warned Democrats to not squander all their gains here. So that certainly was a big factor. But there is no question that there's some unifying to be done. That starts this morning with an eye on November, John.
And again, as you point out, Francesca Hong was divisive. Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they did not endorse her as they had endorsed Abdul Al-Sayed in the Michigan Senate Democratic primary there. I want to say I've been on cable the last few days a lot. It's where I work, and I've heard a lot of Republicans with talking points. They were loaded for bear on Francesca Hong. Francesca Hong was the candidate they were focused on. They were already trying to nationalize her, what they saw as her imminent victory in Wisconsin. How surprised are Republicans this morning?
John, they are very surprised. And not only were they talking about this campaign and how they would effectively use some of her comments, they were trying to prop her up at the same time. A remarkable play here. The Republican governor's Association was spending more than $4 million running ads showing that she's a strong progressive. Well, that was seen as a way to effectively meddle in this race. So Republicans were hoping to run against her. That did not happen. So this race is an example of the establishment striking back. But John, I'm also thinking back to an interview I had with David Crowley on Sunday evening. I asked him about that establishment thing. He said, look, I'm established, but I am not a member of the establishment. If he would win, he would be the first African-American governor right here in Wisconsin.
Absolutely. It will be historic again. And taking on Tom Tiffany, the Republican who easily won the Wisconsin gubernatorial Republican primary. You'll just note, the number of votes cast, some 480,000 in the Republican race. Democrats will point to this and say there were well over 600,000 votes cast in the Democratic primary. They would see that as more energy on their side. Sarah?
All right, thank you so much, John. Breaking overnight, President Trump is now talking for the first time about that elaborate cloak and dagger plan that involved him hiding in a catering truck to switch planes and fly out of Turkey after a threat at the NATO summit last month. Take a listen.
It's only up to Secret Service. I just follow what they'd like to do. So I go by Secret Service and the military. They wanted me to go on a different flight, a different plane, equal safety, but they wanted me to do it, so I do it. I do what they say.
Now, we're learning some new details about what prompted the ruse exactly. Two U.S. officials telling the New York Times there was a specific surface-to-air missile threat. U.S. intelligence was also aware that someone with a shoulder-fired missile was spotted near the NATO summit, and they learned the Iranians knew the president's detailed location. CNN's Kevin Liptak joining us now. I mean, this is really stark. The fact that you had somebody with a shoulder-fired missile, according to the New York Times reporting, the fact that they knew exactly where the president was, the fact that we know that in the past there have been certainly a desire to assassinate the president from the Iranians. What are you learning this morning about all of this?
Yeah, it is quite remarkable, and it does, I think, lead to some explanation for why there was this scramble to develop this furtive plan to get President Trump on a different plane out of the country. I'm told by people familiar with the matter that it was the specificity of what the Iranians knew about the president's arrangements on the ground there that led to their concerns and to their worries. It was people, including from the military and the Secret Service, in that final day of the NATO summit in Ankara, were really huddled behind the scenes for hours and hours to try and come up with this plan to get him out of the country. And it was this specific shoulder-fired missile threat that led to that scramble. It's not clear from my sources where exactly that intelligence came from. We had reported in the days after that summit that the Israelis had come to the U.S. with intelligence about an Iranian assassination plot, but that had been downplayed in a lot of ways. A lot of American officials thought that that was Israel's attempt to influence President Trump's thinking on Iran. So it's not clear where exactly this information came from, but it was viewed as very specific and very credible. And it's remarkable to hear President Trump on the tarmac last night kind of downplaying in a lot of ways the nature of the subterfuge. He did not get into any details about his ride in that catering vehicle. And he seemed to suggest that the plane that did go into the air with journalists, with staff, with military members aboard, that in fact that was the safer flight, and that the plane that he was on was the one that was in real danger. Listen to what he said on that front.
The plane that I flew on was at greater risk, and I think it was at greater risk because that would be the plane I think that they would be more likely to go for. I have a lot of threats. I have a lot of threats that you don't know about. Any consequential president has a lot of threats.
Were you worried about a shoulder-fired missile?
I don't worry about anything, to be honest. Whatever it is, you know my attitude, whatever.
Now, we are learning a little more about who was left behind on that old legacy Air Force One. It included two cabinet secretaries, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, in addition to other members of the White House staff. We don't know, and the White House is not saying at this point, who joined the president in that alternate plane that he flew back to the U.S. on.
Yeah, well, the plane that was the quote-unquote decoy, I mean, could have been in grave danger. You had journalists, you had members of the cabinet on there, some staff members on there. There's a lot of questions that need to be asked surrounding all of this, but a fascinating walkthrough as to what happened to try to keep the president safe, which is the job of the Secret Service. Thank you so much, Kevin Liptak. Great reporting from you there in Washington. All right, ahead, new CNN reporting on Congressman Max Miller. We've learned about a broader pattern of alleged violence dating back years before the current allegations that he abused his ex-wife. Plus, a baby. These pictures are incredible. Rescued from the rubble after that devastating earthquake in Colombia. We are on the ground in one of the hardest hit areas as urgent rescues like this one are currently underway. Wow. And millions will get a chance to see a total solar eclipse. So exciting. I love it when this happens. We will tell you where the best views will be. Those stories and more ahead.
All right, this morning, new reporting on Congressman Max Miller, the Republican who did not drop out of his Ohio re-election race despite domestic abuse allegations. Court filings by Miller's ex-wife, the daughter of Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno, allege a pattern of violent and unsettling behavior, including throwing hot water on her in one incident and pointing a gun at her in another. Miller has denied all of the allegations and says they are politically motivated. This morning, CNN has new reporting on earlier incidents where he was accused of violent or problematic behavior. With us now, Allison Gordon with the CNN investigative team. Allison, what have you learned here?
Yeah, that's right, John. I obtained police reports, went through court records, and spoke to more than a half dozen people who knew Max Miller when he was younger. And nearly all of them described him in a similar way. Aggressive, hot-headed, quick to start fights, with outbursts that made others uncomfortable. And people say that it became worse when he drank. Miller also had several criminal charges during this period. He had at least 4 run-ins with the police between 2007 and 2011, with charges like disorderly conduct, intoxication, criminal mischief for punching through a window after a night out, and crashing a Jeep into a light pole on a college campus. The police report said MDMA and other prescription drugs were found in his bloodstream. Now, John, that crash seemed like a turning point. I spoke with 3 people from the time who told me that Miller tried to get sober in this period and make amends. One is a man who used to play baseball with Miller in high school, and he said that later on, Miller made it a point to apologize for his past bad behavior. Former classmates also told me he had a reputation for being misogynistic. One woman told me that he was not someone you wanted to be close with as a female. And former friends said he would brag about his sexual exploits and make degrading comments about girls, specifically about their weight.
So one of the women who has made allegations against him, and this has been reported publicly for some time, is a woman who said during their teenage years that he pushed her down the stairs at a party. I do understand you spoke to someone who arrived there just after that incident allegedly occurred?
That's right, John. According to my sources, Miller threw a party at his parents' house, and sometime that night, he allegedly pushed a female classmate down the stairs after she rejected advances from him. Now, I spoke to a man who encountered the girl moments after the alleged incident. He said that she was crying inconsolably. That party happened around 2006, and I should note that Miller has repeatedly denied that he pushed her.
And former White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham, who was dating Miller when they both worked in the White House, she has made allegations as well. What have you learned there?
That's right, John. In 2021, Miller was accused of physical abuse while in a relationship with former press secretary Stephanie Grisham. He denied ever abusing her, and he sued her for defamation shortly after she published an op-ed in the Washington Post. I should note that Miller did not respond to my request for comment on this story, but he has consistently denied allegations of abuse by the women who have accused him. When the Washington Post contacted him in 2018 about some of the charges related to drinking and disorderly conduct, like I mentioned earlier, Miller told the Post at the time, quote, "Growing up, everyone makes mistakes. Who I was in the past is not who I am now."
Allison Gordon, thanks for sharing your new reporting on this. Add some details to this conversation. All right, new video shows a state trooper punching an 18-year-old woman during an arrest. And Spotify making changes about how AI artists are handled.
This morning, A growing call for answers after dash camera video captured an Arkansas state trooper slamming an 18-year-old woman to the ground and punching her in the face. Alyssa Hackett was first pulled over for speeding and driving with her hazard lights on. According to the incident report, the trooper says he moved to arrest her for having a bottle of liquor in her front passenger seat after another trooper said he had given her a verbal warning for alcohol possession during a separate traffic stop. The incident appears to escalate, though, when Hackett questions why she's being arrested, and the trooper says she tried to turn around. She is now filing a federal civil rights complaint accusing the trooper of excessive force. And we should warn you, this video is really disturbing. CNN's Ryan Young has been looking into this story. When we all first saw this video, it takes your breath away.
Yeah, it's disturbing to see, especially when you put all the events together. He's calmly talking to her. Right. Everything seems to be proceeding along very routinely. Yeah. But at some point, there's an escalation in it, and you can see the trooper take her to the ground. Now, of course, we're going to play this video for you, but the trooper did say he saw an unopened bottle of alcohol in the seat near her. There was also, she was driving with flashing lights. She was going over the speed limit. But it's what happens in the next seconds when he says he's going to take her under arrest that really is troubling to a lot of people. In fact, let's take a watch right now.
If she got an attitude, take her to jail.
Okay. All right, we'll do that. Yeah, let me get your left hand real quick.
So what did I do?
Get your left hand real quick. Do not look. Do not resist. Do not resist.
I need to call Mama.
No. Stop.
But I didn't. What am I doing? Oh no!
Stop. Turn around. Turn around. Turn around. Turn around.
Yeah, it is hard to watch. You notice the trooper, Moses Arellano, he used what is considered what is a lat drop, and he basically tosses her to the ground. After the toss to the ground, you can tell she is disoriented. And then he provides that one hand strike to the face, and at some point, he even thinks about tasing her, but he decides not to tase her in that moment. And so what the questions are is whether or not it needed to escalate that far, right. And that's what her attorneys are asking. Right. Ben Crump is now going to represent her. But the real questions come from, she's only 5'1", 118 pounds. We're not saying that she couldn't have struggled, but what you don't see is what escalated to the point where the toss was needed and that closed fist punch was delivered to her face. Just watching the reaction online, you can see a lot of people were troubled by that punch, and you can hear her screaming as she's calling for her mother. Yeah, she initially you hear her say, "I need to call my mama," because she was clearly surprised that she was getting arrested. Right. We don't know what transpired in the car and what the officers put in their report. Too many times we have done these stories, we have covered these stories where the report does not match what actually happens. Yeah. But I am curious, you just talked about how large she was, which is very tiny. Yeah. And this officer, the size of the officer is quite a bit larger than her. There are some questions as to procedure here, because if one officer cannot deal with a woman who is 118 pounds, and this is the result of it, there are clearly some issues that need to be talked through. Well, I think the question will become use of force and whether or not that Arkansas State Board believes what he did was right. And so he seems very controlled after that punch, but the question will be, especially, did he ever have to put both hands on her, and could he have gotten both hands behind her without delivering the toss and the punch? But he is being investigated, but at the same time, he's still out there on the streets at this point right now. Okay, so he is not being put on administrative leave, or he is not on the, he's still on the streets. All right, well, there's a lot to go here, and I should tell people we will have Benjamin Crump on to talk about this, the side of the story from the perspective of the woman who was being arrested at that time. A lot more, and I know you'll be watching all of this, 100%. So we'll certainly have you back on too. It's nice to be here in person. Ryan, good to see you. And thank you for wearing that. Yes. I do appreciate it. All us Fox cancer survivors appreciate that. Yes. Appreciate you. All right. New election results coming in overnight. Mainstream Democrats notching a rare win. We break it down. And the coach of the Indiana Fever has had enough of the culture conversations around the WNBA that aren't about what they're about, which is basketball.
I will always stand by them. Everybody else can go to hell.
So the breaking news in the wee hours of the morning, CNN projected that David Crowley, a Milwaukee city councilman, will be the Democratic nominee for governor in Wisconsin, defeating Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong. But you can see the margin here, a razor thin 3,200 votes. That's it. And this was a big upset. Francesca Hong was leading in most of the polls, almost all of the polls leading up to Election Day, in some cases by a substantial margin, and she was seen as being on the far left of the party. So controversial, even Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they did not endorse her. So this was a stunning result, and one that might cause a little bit of a sigh of relief for national Democrats, establishment Democrats around the country. Want to go to Andrew Desiderio, senior congressional reporter for Punchbowl News. Again, an unexpected result, sort of an establishment strikes back. What's the significance of this, do you think, going forward?
Well, look, Republicans were certainly hoping to be able to run against Francesca Hong. The Republican nominee for governor in that race is Congressman Tom Tiffany, and they were openly talking about it as such. And I think it just further underscores and highlights some of the polling misses we've seen so far throughout these primaries. I mean, just look at the Michigan Senate race, for example. Abdul El-Sayed was up by around 10 points according to the polling average. He only ended up winning by a few points. And so, you know, we have to, I think, take a lot of these polls going forward with a grain of salt, especially when there's so much fervor surrounding this moderate versus progressive fight that's ongoing within the Democratic Party.
Look, it's also possible that David Crowley closed the gap substantially the last few days when there was much more national focus on this race. I want to talk about your area of expertise.
Absolutely.
I want to hone in on Connecticut here, if I can. Scroll up and look at the House races here, because there was an incumbent to go down. John Larson, right here, who's been in Congress since, what, 1999? He was defeated by Luke Bronin. Tell me about the significance of another Democratic incumbent going down in a primary.
Well, this is the 7th House Democrat to lose a primary this cycle, and it was another example of the sort of generational change that we're seeing from Democratic voters, from the Democratic base, a desire for that generational change. John Larson has been in office since, as you mentioned, 1999. There have been questions surrounding his health as well. He had a freezing incident on the House floor, actually, that was similar to what we saw from Mitch McConnell. He froze up, essentially, as he was in the middle of speaking, and Luke Bronin and other Democrats who were looking for that generational change used that and other health issues that John Larson has had over the years to try to oust him from office.
And one other notable thing here, this was not close. This was a blowout, so a challenger defeating an incumbent. One more race I want to point out here. Again, your area of expertise. Want to go down to South Carolina, the special primary there to long-term replace the seat held by Lindsey Graham, the deceased senator. His sister is currently serving in a temporary role. The first two people progress here. You can see Darlene Graham did lead the field, but just at 32% of the vote. She and Ralph Norman now progress to a runoff. The significance of that?
Well, look, I think this is going to be a major test of the sort of value of the Trump endorsement going forward. Usually it's the golden ticket in a Republican primary, especially in a red state like South Carolina. But Ralph Norman is someone who has those House Freedom Caucus bona fides, and he's someone who has been running for governor for the past year as well. Of course, he didn't win the nomination for governor, but he's someone who's been on the airwaves for a long time in South Carolina. He is a MAGA conservative, and President Trump even acknowledged that last night when he was asked by reporters about it as he came off of Air Force One. And he also essentially said, I thought this was really fascinating, John. He said that he only really endorsed her because of her brother, Lindsey Graham. And a lot of Senate Republicans, I've been told, believe that it was kind of careless on the part of the president to push her into this race, knowing that she was, of course, grieving the death of her brother, and also just the fact that folks didn't know much about her. And so this is going to be a really interesting runoff. It's only a 2-week runoff, and the president indicated that he's going to go campaign for her. So we'll see if he can overcome all of that.
Yeah, this will be a race, or could very well be a race over the next 2 weeks. And I will note, she is technically an incumbent in the sense that she is currently the sitting senator. She has the same name. Obviously, last name is Lindsey Graham. Just 32% of the vote in the elections last night. Andrew Desiderio, thank you so much for being with us. Much more to come here and in other races still in this primary season. Sarah?
All right, thank you so much, John. To keep this conversation going, joining me now is Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Illinois. He serves on the House Intelligence Committee. Lots of questions for you this morning, but let's start with what happened in Wisconsin. What lessons are you taking away from the Wisconsin primary compared to, say, the Michigan Senate primary? Both close, both with different results, one giving a more moderate candidate the win, the other giving a more progressive candidate a win. What are you taking away from this? What do you learn from this?
Look, this is the Democratic Party. It's not monolithic. It has sections of it. I'm no pundit, but I recognize that, always have. And at critical times, I think they're bound together to do the right thing to win in general elections. We saw that in 2020 when Biden became the nominee. Labels become elusive as well. I'm viewed as progressive on social issues and a fiscal moderate, a fiscal responsibility. But when we compare it to the Republicans, there's a party that has lost its soul. It is the party of Trump. I remember serving with Representative Flake from Arizona, and he still believes the Republicans need to move in that direction. So I get the conflict that exists within our parties. I'd like to think the Democrats will always, in the end, do the right thing. But as we've always said, it's a big tent. There's a lot of people with voices to be heard. I'm not the one to tell voters that they're making the wrong decision. That's up to them.
Look, along this vein, you are running for mayor in Chicago as a moderate versus someone who is considered much more progressive. Are you running because you have a problem with the agenda of progressives like Mayor Brandon Johnson?
You know, I think the mayor is sincere. I don't have a problem with the mayor in that vein, but I'll say this. The number one issue in Chicago is the number one issue nationwide. It's affordability, and it begins with housing. Chicago's probably 100,000 units short. I disagree with the mayor on how we get that done. Is that a progressive agenda? No, I think it's a pragmatic one. This is about accomplishing things. It's about governing well. And there's a lot of things we could do to move in the right direction.
Look, I want to talk to you about some of the new reporting that we've gotten this morning, and I'm sure some of which you have heard. The president is essentially admitting there was this cloak and dagger ruse to get him to safety after threats at the NATO summit. We've now confirmed what the New York Times first reported, that there was someone spotted with a shoulder-fired missile near that summit. So the president gets on another plane to keep him safe, as is protocol. But his cabinet members, some of his staff, the journalists that fly on Air Force One, unknowingly were on the plane that could have been the target for Iran to try and assassinate the president. So what questions do you have about how all this went down? And do you think that Congress should be briefed on all this?
Congress should absolutely be briefed on this. I mean, here's the question. What the hell? Who thought it would be a good idea to use one of the Air Force One's cabinet members, members of the press, and other staff as what? Decoys. I was in Turkey shortly after the failed coup that took place there several years ago. When I landed, there were security concerns, and my trip was shortened, and where I went to in the country was shortened. I get how security concerns can come about in a quick period of time, but even in a short period of time, reasonableness, a sense of mutual respect for cabinet members and members of the press and other staff should have at least told somebody this plane doesn't take off. If we're going to divert where the president goes or how this moves forward, we should treat everyone in the same vein. Their security is as important, at least in terms of the respect we hold for them.
I do want to lastly ask you about this former Marine who was held in Russia for 4 years. He was taken into custody in 2022. There are accusations that he was psychologically and physically beaten. and that he is going through a tough time. But the president managed to get him back to the United States with negotiation with Russia. Are you giving the president credit for that this morning?
Look, I give anyone credit for using diplomatic means to a positive end. Putin is a monster. I think the president needs to recognize this is what Putin is like, right? He has kidnapped tens of thousands of Ukrainian kids and taken them to Russia. So look, you can commend the president for this, but I think he has to recognize the bigger picture, that Putin is a war criminal, and treating Ukraine and Russia as somehow moral equivalents in this conflict is wrong. I stood on the ground of Bucha where there was 500 bodies beneath me in a mass grave. I just think, this is fine, Mr. President, but let's look at Putin in the bigger picture and recognize what he's done and hold him accountable for what he's done in Ukraine and to many others of his own citizens.
Yeah, bringing up Bucha, I was there myself and witnessed some of that as well. Extremely disturbing, and there are a lot of questions about what the president is planning to do vis-a-vis Ukraine when it comes to, for example, Patriot missiles and the like, where he has been a bit wishy-washy on whether or not the United States is going to hand over some of that technology to Ukraine that they've been asking for. Congressman Mike Quigley, it is a pleasure to speak to you this morning. Thank you so much for coming on bright and early, because I know it's an hour earlier there in Illinois, one of my favorite states. I appreciate you. John.
All right, happening now. Recovery teams in Colombia searching for survivors after the worst earthquake there in decades. More than 220 deaths have been confirmed so far, but again, that death toll is rising. Still, this morning there have been signs of hope. Rescue crews saved a woman trapped beneath the collapsed hotel. She'd been there for more than 36 hours. Then in the city of Cali, a baby was pulled from the wreckage of a destroyed apartment building. Workers say it was the faint whispers of a man also trapped under the debris that helped locate the child. Sarah?
All right. Thank you so much, John. New this morning, lawyers with several civil rights groups are asking a federal judge to block President Trump's new birthright citizenship orders. In the court papers filed in New Hampshire, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU as it's known, said Trump's latest attempt to curb the right is unlawful. The attorneys wrote, the court should underscore that the government may not strip away class members' citizenship through any executive orders or other similarly flawed assertions of executive power over birthright citizenship. This marks the first direct challenge to the new executive order since it was signed last week by the president. Joining me now is former U.S. Attorney Michael Moore. He's much more than a former U.S. attorney. He does a lot of things. All right, so look, the Supreme Court rejected this idea in the first place of changing I guess the meaning of the 14th Amendment and who gets this right. If you are born in this country, they were clear, you belong to this country. You are a citizen. So give me some sense, we knew this was going to end up in court. Give me some sense about what the president has done in these executive orders, and if you see any path for him to potentially end up back at the Supreme Court.
Sure. Well, it's good to be with you
It's good to see you in person.
This is really just another effort by Trump to exert authority where he doesn't have it. You remember he had a really resounding loss just a few months ago in the Supreme Court when the court came out and said, look, if you're born here, the children have a right to be here, we're not going to let you do this. Well, now we're getting close to an election. His numbers are tanking. He needs to revive an issue to campaign on, so this is just another order to put out there. What he did in this last and most recent executive order is he sort of expanded what the court had said would be permissible. So he now says, you know, we're going to limit the categories of people, but I'm also going to say folks coming in who may be guilty of birthright tourism.
Right.
And that's such a subjective definition that he can tell his minions out there in the State Department otherwise to just look at people and say, well, we think maybe since you're coming here that you intend to have a baby and try to ban them. That's going nowhere.
Yeah.
And I think this is really more about politics than it is about real law. And he's known for trying to exert and his king-like authority by signing a piece of paper and putting his wax seal on it, I guess. But I think the court's going to make short work of this.
Well, it was no surprise that as soon as this was signed, that some group, and the ACLU being the one that you would expect, would go up against this and say, hold on a second, he's trying to mess with this again. Is this right? The courts will end up deciding in the end, right?
They'll decide to give it. It keeps the issue for him alive for the next 90 days while he campaigns.
That's correct. All right. So he's also using his executive power to try to reshape the childhood vaccine schedule. And I was really wondering, I was sort of listening to him go through what he said was, he was giving some medical advice, which, a lot of doctors are rightfully so upset with. What power does the president have to exert his rules in this instance? Does he have it?
He doesn't have any. There's a vaccine policy that goes through the vaccine advisory panel, and then it goes through the CDC, and so there's this recommendation process and this implementation process is already built in. I mean, frankly, we could just say, well, tell us what vaccine the Trump children have and what their process was, and maybe we'll be fine letting every child in America have that, But it's shocking to me that he comes out and claims to be a doctor and maybe plays one on TV and gives us idea that somehow he's got a better way to do it in the midst of a measles outbreak and otherwise. So he really has no authority to implement this at all. This is just another campaign issue. It's another sort of promise that he talked about and a talking point, and I think it'll go nowhere. And it's not something that could be implemented quickly regardless because of the things that would have to happen to change the vaccines and do that kind of thing. But you're starting back to school. I mean, these parents are like playing ping pong in a hurricane, right? They don't know which way to go. They're getting direction and it comes through. So here we are again.
Those Southern sayings, I miss them so much. Playing ping pong in a hurricane.
That's what it feels like.
I'm keeping that one if you don't mind.
It feels like to me, so that's really great.
All right, thank you so much. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
All right, John.
All right, new this morning, Spotify announced a new way to identify AI on its platform. They say they're going to add a badge to accounts that appear to be AI generated on the profiles and the search tab and next to the names on the playlist. Profiles with the AI persona label will not be included in Spotify's algorithmic recommendations. They said, quote, true artist-fan connection can only be built on a foundation of trust and authenticity. So the badge is going to be based on the artist's public identity, as in, is it a human or is it a computer, not how the music was made, so AI can be used to help a human make the music. Powerful storm flips a car on a highway. Which areas are under threat this morning? And strange noises coming from the trunk. Police recover a pair of baby goats from a stolen car.
The Indiana Fever on a win streak despite some controversy. And their coach has had plenty of y'all talking smack. Today, about 2.5 minutes ahead of the Fever's win over the New York Liberty to blast outsiders for trying to bring divisiveness to the WNBA. The British in me came out. Divisiveness is how they say it here
You say it
in
however
America.
you want.
CNN's Andy Scholes is here with us to discuss. She was hot sauce.
Yeah, she was hot. Yeah, and so the discourse around the WNBA these days, it's been about everything other than basketball, right? You got former NBA players, Enes Kanter Freedom and Royce White. They've declared for the WNBA draft. And the whole Dejanay Carrington, Hart Foul, and Sophie Cunningham controversy from over the weekend. Well, many Fever fans took some issue. What are you pointing at me for?
That's me pointing. I just want to try it.
Many Fever fans, they took some issue with how Fever head coach Stephanie White handled that situation. They were not happy that she didn't stick up more for Cunningham. Actually booed White during pregame introductions. Now, Caitlin Clark said she hated that the fans booed White, and she loves playing for her. Now, before all of that, White gave an impassioned statement to reporters about people trying to hijack the WNBA.
The hate, the fear-mongering, the divisiveness, the stuff that's trying to hijack our league will not win. When they go low, we go high. Love will win. Grace will win. Humility will win. And kindness will win. I stand by them. I will always stand by them. Everybody else can go to hell.
All right. Well, as for the actual Fever game, Caitlin Clark, she put up 22 points ago with 10 assists. Indiana beat New York in that one, 106-92. Meanwhile, in baseball, it was Pope Leo night in Chicago. So the White Sox gave out 40,000 Pope hats. Pope Leo, of course, from Chicago, big Sox fan. Sister Mary Jo, she was on hand to throw out the first pitch. Check her out. She fires that one in there, put a little heat on that. And then the first batter of the game for the White Sox, Brenton Doyle, he went yard. Doyle then went and got himself a Pope hat to celebrate in the dugout. Fun night there. White Sox were up 4-0 on the Reds, but Cincinnati rallied and went to come back to win that game 5-4 in extras. Finally, new fear unlocked. A high school player in Arkansas practiced football for nearly an hour with a viper in his helmet. The player said he felt unusual movements going on in his helmet, and then following warm-ups, he brought it to an assistant coach for inspection. That's when they found a 2-foot cottonmouth viper in there behind some of the padding. Cottonmouths, the second most venomous snakes found in Arkansas. They got it out of the helmet, Sarah, and then went and threw it in the woods. But kids, check your helmets before you put them on. You never know if there's going to be a viper in there.
I'm too scared to move. Like, are you serious?
My sons play football, and I couldn't imagine. Like, Dad's viper in my...
Okay, first of all, cottonmouth. I'm afraid of it all.
Man.
That's not okay. And I'm from Florida. I'm used to seeing those darn things, but not in a helmet. Andy Scholes, it is a pleasure. No helmets on set. John?
All right, that's messed up. New this morning, deadly, relentless storm slamming the Midwest with the potential for more flooding ahead. At least 2 people have been killed. A funnel cloud there somewhere. There it is, a funnel cloud spotted on the road in Ohio. Also in Ohio, high winds flipped the car. You can see barely visible there. You can see those lights there, the car going over. That happened near Columbus. There were wind gusts of more than 90 miles per hour. The region's expecting more storms today. The Powerball jackpot is now the 8th largest in history, about $1 billion. The odds of winning are about 1 in 292 million, which means you won't. Sarah.
John, darn it. But you guess what you will see? This is so cool. Space enthusiasts, get ready. You've got a rare chance to see a meteor shower and an eclipse this week. Today, if you're in the northern hemisphere, you can see either a total or partial solar eclipse. CNN's Allison Chinchar here with me now. She's got on her eclipse outfit, which she doesn't get to wear all the time.
We do not get to wear this all the time, so this was a very special occasion. I'm excited. And yes, I know a lot of the focus on this eclipse is really over Europe, but it doesn't mean that people in the U.S. won't get a chance to see at least something. So here's kind of the breakdown. Again, the farther north into the northeast you are, the better chance you have. So places like, say, the Cape in Massachusetts, Maine, these are going to be the areas where you have the highest chance to see it if we don't have too much cloud cover or even some rain showers kind of hindering, because there are going to be some of those out there across the Midwest and into the Northeast today. We zoom in a little bit closer. You can see a lot of them in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. So that could in turn cause some issues as we go into the afternoon hours, which is when it should peak for those in the Eastern time zone. Here's a look at what we're talking about. So the peak, the best that you're going to see is going to be in this black row here. So say, for example, Halifax, Nova Scotia, about 3 p.m. is the peak time there. Boston, right about 1:55 p.m. local time. Philadelphia, about 1:53. So again, there's still a chance that you could see something as long as we don't have too many showers or cloud cover there. Obviously going to be a much better shot at seeing this over portions of Spain, especially around Mallorca. Here are some of the key spots. Reykjavik and Iceland, yes, you're going to get that eclipse. However, we could be contending with a lot of cloud cover there. The much better conditions are going to be in Zaragoza and Valencia, but it is going to be hot there, Sarah. Very hot.
You mean to tell me I came to Atlanta and now I'm going to miss the eclipse because I could have seen it better when I was in New York?
Just a little bit
Nab
more.
it? All right, well, I'll just watch it on TV. Good times. Thank you so much, Allison. All right. Join Boris Sanchez and Brianna Keeler for special live coverage, so you can see it on TV, of the total solar eclipse today at 1 o'clock Eastern on CNN and on the app. A new hour of CNN News Central starts right now.
The breaking news this morning, the major upset in the Wisconsin governor's primary and the major setback for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. For the first time, President Trump confirms the operation that had him hiding in a catering truck because of a threat to Air Force One. CNN has new reporting on the senior officials he left behind on the plane. And we are standing by for a brand new report on inflation after that weak jobs report. What will we learn about the relative strength of the economy? Kate is out today. I'm John Berman with Sarah Seidner, and this is CNN News Central. All right, breaking news. This wasn't settled until just a few hours ago. A big upset and maybe a sign of the limits for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. CNN now projects that David Crowley has narrowly, oh so narrowly defeated Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong in that state's race to be the nominee for governor there. The margin as of a few minutes ago was just about 3,200 votes. Hong was hoping to capitalize on a string of progressive victories this summer. Still, she had been seen as more controversial than some other progressive candidates. She was not endorsed by Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We are expecting to hear from the now nominee Crowley later this morning, so we are standing by for that. And he now faces Republican Tom Tiffany in the November general election. Let's go to CNN's Jeff Zeleny, who has not slept much, live in Madison this morning. I will note, Jeff, I was on TV last night, and the margin was like several hundred votes, and then just after I went off air, Francesca Hong actually went up by about a few hundred votes. This thing was a nail-biter.
It certainly was, John. Good morning. And when she went up, really for one of the only times in the evening, I was at her election night headquarters. The crowd went crazy. They thought that this was the moment she was going to overturn things, but that did not happen. And boy, what a comeback this was for David Crowley. He's the Milwaukee County executive who dropped out of the race on July 8th, got back into the race 10 days later, and went on for this narrow victory over Francesca Hong. Now, she is a 37-year-old Democratic socialist. She's a member of the General Assembly right here in Madison, and she was really trying to tap into this demand for change. And John, as we talked to so many voters, they really liked her a lot. They thought she was inspiring, but there were many questions about electability. That's often hanging over elections, but in this case, it seemed more acute. There's no doubt about that. But when she addressed her supporters last evening, she said she's not going away.
We have built something that will change politics forever. The work we have done will be remembered forever.
And there is no doubt that she built a progressive movement, but she also had many stumbles and many reversals. She had to walk back some previous statements about defunding the police, some other things about canceling Thanksgiving as well. But at the end of the day here, I'm not sure that this race turned on any of that except the electability argument more broadly here. So she vowed that she would campaign with her arrival if he was to win. We have not yet heard from her this morning, but we have no reason to expect that she would not do so. She did talk about the Republican last evening in her speech. Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany, he won his primary last evening. Now this race will, of course, become one between Tiffany and David Crowley. But John, a remarkable comeback here, and certainly an interesting data point in a long-running summer of progressive wins. Wisconsin, at least here, the establishment fought back.
Yeah,
John?
Bucking the trend there. I will note it's possible that there were a lot of people who either changed their minds or were late deciders here. People are going to talk about how the polls were off, and they were, but it's possible there were a lot of late decisions made.
No doubt.
You saw that.
Undecideds, for sure.
And then one other point I'll make. I think people had counted out David Crowley so much here. I've been mislabeling him as a Milwaukee City Councilman all morning long. He was a county executive. I think people haven't even learned really about him yet. He was a relative unknown. Jeff Zeleny, you do amazing
the old
work.
Scott Walker seat.
There you go. And he served for several decades in Wisconsin. Jeff Zeleny, thank you very much. Sarah.
Thank you so much, John Berman. Breaking this morning, new details on the threat that prompted U.S. officials to concoct that elaborate covert plane switching operation to fly the president out of Ankara, Turkey last month. The source confirms to CNN that a specific threat to Air Force One from a shoulder-fired missile emerged on the final day of the NATO summit. U.S. officials found it credible enough. They believe the president would be in danger if he flew out on either the old Air Force One or the new Qatari-donated jet. Here's what the president had to say about all this.
It's only up to Secret Service. I just follow what they'd like to do. So I go by Secret Service and the military. They wanted me to go on a different flight, a different plane, equal safety, but they wanted me to do it, so I do it. I do what they say.
CNN's Kevin Liptak has brand new reporting for us this morning. What are you learning, Kevin?
Yeah, and it's interesting what we're learning about what led to this scramble to develop this very elaborate ruse. Officials detecting what they view to be as a very specific threat against Air Force One by a shoulder-fired missile while the president was on the ground there in Ankara, there was enormous risk, in their view, on the president's life if he departed the country in either the Qatar-donated jet that he flew there on or on the Legacy Air Force One that was part of this deception plan that they put together. And behind the scenes, officials from the military, from the Secret Service, all really scrambling to put together this deception that was carried out on the tarmac of the Ankara airport. And it is interesting to listen to the president last night, both confirming at least the broad contours of what this plan looked like, but also in a lot of ways trying to downplay the subterfuge, the president kind of shrugging off the idea that this whole other plane that was filled with members of his staff, with military, with journalists, was put into the air to act essentially as a decoy. And in fact, the president suggesting that it was the plane that he was on, even though no one knew he was on it, that was in fact the less safe of the two aircraft. Listen to what he said there.
The plane that I flew on was at greater risk. And I think it was at greater risk because that would be the plane I think that they would be more likely to go for. I have a lot of threats. I have a lot of threats that you don't know about. Any consequential president has a lot of threats.
Were you worried about a shoulder-fired missile?
I don't worry about anything, to be honest. Whatever it is, you know my attitude, whatever.
Now, we do now know a little bit more about who is left behind on that old Legacy Air Force One. It included two cabinet secretaries, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. There are other White House officials as well who flew on that plane without President Trump to that airbase in Britain where the president linked up with the Qatar plane. At this point, we don't know exactly who joined the president, both in the catering truck and in the smaller plane that he used to get out of Turkey. The White House isn't disclosing those details. Sarah.
Some of those details will certainly be kept secret to keep the president safe. Kevin Liptak, though, there are a lot of questions about those who were on the plane that was the potential target and why they were told nothing and why it took off. Lots of questions that Congress also would like to ask. John.
All right, brand new reporting this morning on how the government is shelling out tens of millions of dollars to equip ICE agents with electrical shock gloves. And the U.S. embassies in the Middle East preparing to operate with reduced staff, this amid the ongoing war with Iran. And a toddler strapped to a car seat rescued from a smoke-filled home.
New this morning, ICE agents and officers may soon be using a new tool in encounters, gloves that deliver electric shocks. The manufacturer says these gloves are meant to de-escalate situations. You see them being demonstrated here. According to a notice published this week by the Department of Homeland Security, ICE is planning to spend an estimated $10 to $20 million to purchase these devices. Compliant Technologies makes the gloves, and in 2024, a distributor said the way the technology is used isn't capable of causing injury, adding, quote, "We usually get compliance within 3 seconds." This news comes as ICE agents are facing scrutiny over what critics are calling aggressive and dangerous tactics, and as the Trump administration is pushing for a quota to make 2,000 arrests per day. DHS did not immediately respond to CNN's request for comment on this story. Joining me now, CNN senior national security analyst Juliette Kayyem. I mean, the first and obvious question is, what do you think about having this as another tool? Obviously, we have seen, police officers around the country using tasers. There have been some issues with those. But what do you think about these gloves and the possibility that ICE will be using these during detentions?
Well, the gloves, in theory, and GLOVE is for generated low output voltage emitter, so it's glove. The gloves generically are a tool. So like, you put them on, there's sort of an on-off switch. So if you touch someone, they may not feel it. When you turn it on, they're going to get a voltage that's described as sort of an intense bee sting. They're not supposed to do it for longer than 15 seconds. So this may be helpful, and I will say that the devices have mostly been used, at least from the public record. The company is not speaking now, at least from the public record, in confined situations, a jail. That may make sense because there's really no freedom of movement. Go forward to ICE and where we are now. This is asking for intense trouble for the American public. ICE is not known for de-escalation. The rules of engagement for ICE are not understood. And with this mandate from the White House of 2,000 arrests a day, you are now have sort of issued ICE to sort of go around, touch people, and zap them and say that they're not compliant. We know ICE. I'm going to be direct here. We know ICE lies. They've been shown to lie.
They have.
And so this could be a real danger for the American public.
They have been shown to lie in court. And so, judges have made those, made that very plain and clear. I do want to ask you about, because we've talked about this before, but it with this extra tool, when you consider the idea that there is a quota, most departments have gotten rid of these, right? I mean, this was a whole big thing with law enforcement many, many decades ago. And now that it's back for ICE and ICE only, generally speaking, what does this do to law enforcement agents when they have this thing sitting over their head that, oh, we need to get 2,000 per day?
And they have billions and billions of dollars authorized to do so. So it's the combination of the mandate with the resources that has become the sort of scary aspect of ICE for most of the American public. Sarah, I'm so glad that you raised this. People often ask me, like, how do you reform ICE? We have to abolish it. Look, and America needs an enforcement agency, and one that's interior enforcement agency. We have unlawful immigrants in the country. The White House promised that they would go after the worst of the worst. That is so clearly not true anymore. If you ask me what is the one thing that needs to be done to reform ICE, to make it an effective and lawful law enforcement agency that has a mandate that is legitimate, it would be this quota. This quota is a political quota. It is not an operational quota. It's coming from Stephen Miller and Donald Trump and says 2,000. We need 2,000. Well, what that means is that senior managers are then pushing that down to the operational level. And then that means that these guys and women who have been onboarded with less training, less support, fewer rules of engagement are now deployed to satisfy a number. So giving them a new tool is dangerous with this mandate.
Juliette Kayyem, it is always a pleasure to talk through these issues with you. They are big issues and they're not going away, so we will be talking a lot more about this in the coming days. Thank you so much. All right, ahead, we're standing by this morning for the release of a key inflation report and what it might tell us about the state of our economy. Plus, the White House journalists now pushing for safeguards after President Trump's secret plane swap in Turkey, which left them on a plane that was a potential target for Iran. We'll talk about it ahead.
New this morning, sources tell CNN that the State Department is asking U.S. embassies across the Middle East to make contingency plans to keep operating with a reduced staff. Now, non-emergency personnel and family members were ordered to leave nearly every diplomatic post in the region shortly after the war with Iran began in late February. But this latest development highlights the fact that the State Department doesn't seem to expect to return to normal operations anytime soon. CNN senior reporter Jennifer Hansler at the State Department. What are you learning about this?
Well, that's right, John. According to my sources, the State Department has asked embassies that are already on what's called ordered departure, meaning only emergency personnel remained on the ground, to come up with plans for what's called restricted operations, which is that continued smaller footprint of personnel that are on the ground in each country. And now all this comes at the same time as the State Department has increasingly allowed diplomats who were displaced from the Middle East to do what's called a curtailment, which is ending their assignments a little early. Taken together, this does indicate that the State Department does not believe that it is likely to be able to return to its full normal staffing at a number of these embassies anytime in the near future. Under State Department rules, they are required after 6 months to move from ordered departure to either restricted operations or back to normal functioning. Now, These plans have not been finalized yet, the sources said, but once they are, they may add a little bit of clarity to what has been nearly 6 months of uncertainty for diplomats and their family members. Ahead of the start of the war against Iran in late February, the State Department had not moved most of its embassies at all in terms of their staffing or presence there. However, within weeks, as these embassies came under attack by Iran, they moved into what's called ordered departure for places like Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, meaning that family members and non-emergency personnel had to leave the region and return to the United States. But that's caused a lot of uncertainty because they didn't know when they would be coming back, meaning in terms of housing, schooling, things like this. They didn't know if they could make long-term commitments. And a number of them have now decided to just make those decisions now to stay. With the school year coming up, they have to make these choices. As one diplomatic spouse told me, quote, "We've had evacuations in various parts of the world, but this is different in that there's such a large portion of people from one part of the world with so many people coming back to one spot. We had no idea when we walked out of our house in March that we not only wouldn't be returning in 6 months, but now the reality is we won't be returning at all." Now, the State Department said they do not comment on specific contingency plans, but they said security of their personnel is paramount. John?
A reminder, we're dealing with real people with real lives here, but also a reminder that sometimes things just do not go as expected or planned. Jennifer Hansler, really interesting reporting. Thank you very much. Also have new CNN reporting this morning on how the administration is using the Department of Homeland Security to pressure state and local election officials in the pursuit of evidence of voter fraud. And this morning we are thinking of Bonnie Tyler. A total eclipse is coming. Where you will need to be to see it. All right, the breaking news this morning, a big upset in the Democratic governor's primary in Wisconsin. David Crowley, a Milwaukee County executive, defeated Francesca Hong, who was seen as the very progressive candidate, a Democratic socialist, not even endorsed by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, we say it's an upset because the polls leading up to Election Day all had Francesca Hong up by a lot. Now, we've seen this before, just a week ago, in Michigan. So what's going on here? CNN chief data analyst Harry Enton.
It happened again. It happened again. It happened again, Johnny B.
So, how much?
Yeah, how much? I mean, my God, can we catch a break here? Look at this. Polls over state lefties in Dem primaries. You know, last week it was 10 points. You think 10 points is a lot? How about 20 points in Wisconsin? Now, I will note that in this case, Wisconsin had some light candidate switches, candidates coming out, candidates leaving the race. I was suspect after what happened in Michigan that the polling that showed Francesca Hong up by about 20 points was actually going to come to fruition. But it did happen again. The polls overstated the lefties in Wisconsin, just like they did in another Great Lake battleground state of Michigan.
Okay. What are some of the possible reasons why these polls are ultimately overstating the support that they get on Election Day?
Yeah, if this were just about, the fact that the polls overestimated the two lefties, that would be one thing. But I think that this may speak to something bigger, which is the polling may be having too many of those young progressives. And what am I talking about? Well, just take a look here. Who won the 5 counties with the most under the age of 40, that is 18 to 39? In the Michigan Senate, it was Abdul El-Sayed. He won all 5. How about in Wisconsin, Governor? The exact same thing. In the youngest counties, that is where these lefties did the best. And so when you kind of look at the polling, you go, hey, wait a minute, maybe these polls had too many younger folks in them. And I think that speaks to something larger potentially, which is all these pollings, which is showing progressivism on the left, the far left rising, seeing democratic socialism, especially in the case of Wisconsin, rising. You got to look at these results and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe, Johnny, maybe these polls are overestimating how much that democratic socialism is rising within the Democratic Party, because in 2 key statewide races in a row, what we've seen is the lefties being vastly overestimated, and in the case of Wisconsin, the Democratic Socialists being vastly overestimated by 20 points.
If you oversample among young people, one of the things that can happen is young people don't vote as much.
Yes.
And then you can skew the ultimate results there.
Correct, and I think that means so much as we're looking at these polls and what the actual implications are in terms of how big the left rises.
And the other thing that may have happened in Wisconsin, especially in Wisconsin, is that people who hadn't decided may have decided late, or they may have changed their minds because of a lot of the things that people were talking about just in the last few weeks with Francesca Hong may not have helped her, like, say, her past positions not digging Thanksgiving.
Yeah, folks, if you're going to run for political office in this country, dare I say you should be pro-Thanksgiving from the beginning of the campaign to the end of the campaign. Enough of the anti-Thanksgiving stuff. And why do I say that? Because just look at this. Americans who think or say that they don't celebrate Thanksgiving, it's just 8%. It's just 8%. To put that into some perspective for you, 10% of Americans say the earth is flat, and 12% of Americans say the moon landing was fake. Don't pick a position or be able to be implied that you picked a position in which less people believe in it than say the moon landing was fake or the earth was flat, Johnny.
And I will note that that was the predominant story about her in the news the last few weeks. So that could, certainly the last week, so that could have absolutely had an impact there. Aaron, thank you very much for that.
Johnny.
With us now, CNN Chief Political Analyst David Axelrod. Great to see you this morning. I know it was a late night for you watching these results. Yeah, very late.
How do you look so good, John?
It's a lot of makeup and hairspray. So listen. You had expressed concerns. When it looked like Francesca Hong was way ahead in the polls, you had expressed concerns about what would have happened had she won. So how do you feel about the outcome this morning?
Well, I think Democrats are in a much stronger position today with David Crowley. We should say, as an aside, the governor there, Evers, everyone was ready to blame him for the outcome because he intervened late. He got David Crowley off the bench, the Milwaukee County executive, put him back in the game. He had run and he had dropped out. He came back, and it seemed like a fool's errand that almost ensured Hong's election. And he ended up producing what Crowley needed to win that race. But I think that Crowley, who is more of a center-left Democrat, who has a great personal story. I mean, he's 40 years old. He'd be only the fourth elected African-American governor in this country since Reconstruction, raised in withering poverty. His parents dealt with addiction. I mean, he's got a great story, and he's running against one of the most conservative, and Tom Tiffany, members of the House Freedom Caucus, election denier, a guy who is out of step with the mainstream of Wisconsin voters.
So what do we learn about the limits of some of the leftward movement in Democratic primaries in Wisconsin? And I will note, next door in Minnesota, there was the opposite result, where the more progressive the Senate candidates there, Flanagan just trounced Andy
But we
Craig.
should point out she was kind of a hybrid. Yes, she was more progressive. She also had the endorsement of the state party.
That helps.
She was endorsed by the outgoing Senator Tina Smith. So she had elements of both the established party in Minnesota and progressive roots. So it's not a pure example. It's also a state where you expect the Democratic nominee to win either way, which is not necessarily the case in Wisconsin.
So you think electability played in more there? What do you think
played in more in
Wisconsin?
Yes.
What do you think it tells us all about where the Democrats might be headed moving into November?
Look, I think a lot of Democrats are eager for change, and I wouldn't interpret votes for so-called establishment candidates as votes for the status quo. I don't think that's where the electorate is. I think there'll be a coming together in November, however. You know, midterm elections are invariably about the incumbent in the White House. Donald Trump is terribly unpopular in both Michigan, Wisconsin, also in Minnesota. I think nature will take its course.
You talk about coming together, and the question is, how easy will it be for Democrats when you see these big splits? And I just want to play a little bit of how Congresswoman Haley Stevens, who lost in Michigan, has been dealing with her defeat and heading toward the November election. Listen.
Within 24 hours, you got behind his campaign, and people are wondering why.
Why would you do that?
Well, that's called democracy, friend, right? You don't sign up for a Democratic Party to be salty grapes and just continue to hold the grudge. We certainly have seen that play out. No shots here, but we've seen that play out with our current president. Some might say Mr. Sanders, pursued that approach as well when he didn't win a Democratic nomination.
So you see the establishment stepping up when they lost in Michigan. Do you think the progressive left will step up when they lost in Wisconsin?
Well, I heard Francesca Hong's speech last night to her supporters, and it was all about coming together in November. And she acknowledged she didn't know what the result was going to be. I think people understand the stakes of the election on the Democratic side, so I do think that there'll be a coming together. This race is going to be about the economy, about Donald Trump. And the terrain is very, very perilous for Republicans.
Yeah, not about Thanksgiving now in Wisconsin, which is, I think, what some
a lot of turkeys are disappointed with the result. I want to tell you that.
David Axelrod, great to see you this morning. Let's
Good to see you.
Get a nap in. Sarah.
But you guys are turkeys. You're my favorite. All right, breaking moments ago, new data showing annual inflation slowed slightly last month. CNN senior reporter Matt Egan breaking down the numbers for us. You are so far, Matt. I am so far away. But give us some sense of what these numbers mean to all of us and what they will mean for our own personal economies.
Well, Sarah, these numbers show that inflation did cool off in July, and yet it still remains way too hot. So let me break down the numbers for you. Consumer prices in July were up by 3.4% year over year. That is exactly as expected, and that is a step in the right direction from 3.5% the month before. The monthly rate came in at 0.1%, also exactly as expected, and that's a pretty benign figure. When you look at monthly inflation going back for the last 2 years or so, you can see the last 2 months there's really been this major improvement. We had in June the biggest decline in prices since COVID in 2020, and now we have a small increase in July. Now this is really being driven by gasoline prices. The fact that gas prices came off their peak from earlier in the summer, over all those hopes about the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. However, when we look at the annual inflation rate, you can see at 3.4% annual inflation, it's still well above what's considered healthy, which is 2%. It's also well above where it was when President Trump started his second term. At that point, it was at 3%. So we have higher inflation now than we did when President Trump took office. Now, as far as some of the drivers during this month, again, the big driver was gasoline. Gasoline prices were down by almost 3%, so that helped pull down the overall inflation rate. Groceries on the month, they were only up very, very slightly. So that's good news for consumers as well. However, airfare, look at this, a 2.2% increase just on the month. That is a very big increase, and that, of course, is because jet fuel has gotten so much more expensive. Motor oil also, that's an interesting one, up 5.5% on the month. That's the biggest monthly increase since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started tracking this. And we do know there have been some concerns about a motor oil shortage related to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And the last one here is lettuce. Look at that. Lettuce prices down 16% on the month. That's the biggest decline ever, and that does appear to be reflecting all of those health concerns out there when it comes to lettuce. Last thing for you is wages against inflation. This is what people are really experiencing. Here's the problem. Right now, you do have wages still going up. 3.2% in July. That's not a terrible figure. Okay, that's the yellow line. The problem is that prices are going up even faster. So that means if you adjust paychecks for inflation, they're actually shrinking. So right now, Sarah, a lot of people feel like they can't keep up, and that's because the data suggests that they actually can't.
Yeah,
back to you.
People can't afford their lives. That's what that number is, though it is good news that inflation is down a tick. Matt Egan, thank you so much for walking us through those numbers. And to continue the conversation, we've got global economic analyst Rana Foroohar. She is also the global business columnist and associate editor for the Financial Times. Great paper. You write some great books, which I need you to sign for me at some point. But let's get to these numbers.
I will, absolutely.
It is good that we're seeing, for the average consumer, these numbers kind of come down, inflation starting to tick down a bit. But why does it still feel so bad?
It's a great question, Sarah. For starters, inflation is it's a lagging indicator from a consumer sentiment point of view, right? I mean, we talk about numbers, we're banding about all these statistics, but at the end of the day, it's how you feel. How do you feel sitting in your office? How do you feel when you drive past the gas station and see that price? How do you feel in the grocery store? And people have felt pinched for a long time, and it actually takes months after you begin to feel pinched and feel like, oh my gosh, I'm in a cost of living crisis. I can't afford my life. My house is too expensive. I have to think about medication costs. It takes a while for that feeling to abate. It's almost like a little bit of inflation PTSD, if you will. So yes, it is good that some of those things are coming down. But at the same time, we have a pretty meh job market right now. You know, we don't have a great job market. The trends that have brought us to this point, you know, with housing costs being so much higher, with a lot of people losing healthcare benefits, with education becoming so much more expensive, those have been building for years. The last couple of jobs reports, you know, not so great. And now you're in a place where people are kind of looking around and thinking, well, wait, where are things?
Yeah, it's really difficult when people sort of go to the grocery store or go fill up their car with gas. Even with the prices coming down a bit, they've been so high for so long that people are kind of struggling still with the bottom line. I do want to ask you about credit card debt, and because we're seeing people, the airports are full, right? People are still going on vacation. They're still doing things. When you look across the economy, what are the things that trouble you that you think really need to be focused upon?
You know, Sarah, it's been the same answer for years now. It's the bifurcation. There really are two Americas. There is an America that, you're absolutely right, is waiting in Newark. I just came from there and it's very crowded.
Yeah.
It's August. People are traveling. Actually, summer travel is at a record, in fact, for Americans, both domestically and abroad. So there is a group, and we see these folks. You know, there are groups of people that have that money and can do those trips. That top 10% of the population, which is primarily what we're talking about, is spending 60% of the money in the economy. So you can look around and say, okay, restaurants are open, you know, things are happening, the economy's good. But the folks that are more towards the bottom in terms of wages, in terms of jobs, in terms of assets, maybe they don't have so much in the stock market, maybe they don't own a home, they are not feeling good. They are feeling incredibly pressed. And boy, can you see that in the primary season. You know, you're seeing people gravitating towards more extreme candidates that are saying, hey, we see you, we feel your pain. And we've seen that movie before.
We have seen that movie before, but it is really stark when you think about 10% of the population making up for more than 50% of the economy. Something's got to give. Rana, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being here. You always explain things so well. I appreciate it. All right, just ahead, outrage after bulldozers are seen clearing out land inside a national park in Texas as part of the president's push to build his border wall, why environmentalists say it could change the park forever. Plus, why these seniors are practicing parkour.
Right, new CNN reporting this morning, the Department of Homeland Security boosting efforts to crack down on election fraud. This is the Department of Homeland Security in ways they have not before. CNN's Gabe Cohen joins us now with his new reporting on this. Gabe, what are you learning?
Well, John, we know Trump and his allies have long made these sort of sweeping claims about widespread election fraud and non-citizen voting. And what we're seeing here is the Department of Homeland Security has made uncovering and prosecuting those crimes a top priority. Now, the bulk of that criminal investigative work, that has fallen on an agency called Homeland Security Investigations. It is a component of ICE, usually focused on major crimes like child exploitation or drug trafficking. Now they are doing a lot of these voter fraud cases. And we've obtained these documents and emails showing that in recent months, agents from HSI have been pressing local elections officials for voter records on thousands, if not tens of thousands of people that they believe to be non-citizens who may have knowingly registered or who may have voted, and that can lead to prosecution or even deportations. What these email conversations show, though, is that agents who have been chasing these leads, these lists of names, are at times hitting roadblocks, finding out that they're working with too limited information, they're misidentifying people, and in some cases they are finding that very few of the names that they've been vetting have actually voted or even been registered. Now, for a non-citizen, again, making a false statement to register to vote or, of course, casting a ballot, those are federal crimes. And that is what HSI right now is trying to prove so that they can prosecute these cases. That's what they have been instructed to do. A Department of Homeland Security spokesperson told us in a statement, HSI is actively rooting out and investigating election fraud wherever it can be found. We have repeatedly demonstrated that illegal aliens can and do vote in our elections. It is illegal for non-citizens to cast a ballot and to make false statements to obtain registration. But I can tell you, John, that there is a ton of concern, not just about these criminal investigations, but as that's happening, also about the numbers that the Department of Homeland Security is putting out publicly, where they are saying we have found evidence, even definitive evidence, of hundreds of thousands of non-citizens who are registered to vote in several states. Officials in those states have been pushing back and saying, show us the math there. Show us where you are getting those numbers. The administration is going back and forth with them right now, but we are still waiting to figure out what the scope of the issue is that DHS can actually prove out, as the administration has been pushing this as an election crisis ahead of the midterms.
Yeah, what are the actual provable facts here? Where is that data? Gabe, great reporting. Thank you very much. Sarah?
Thank you so much, John. If you needed something to give you some hope, we were going to give you a story in a bit that you must watch, so stick with us. Take a look at this. In Arizona, you've got some officers there inside a smoke-filled home to save a toddler strapped in a car seat. Officers said that the child was barely conscious when they finally got to her. They brought her outside, then rushed back in to save another child. Police said their mother was found unconscious on the floor and was, quote, too intoxicated to care for both of the children. Officials determined the smoke was coming from a burnt pizza that was in the microwave. Thank God they got to those children in time. All right, today, parts of the northern hemisphere is going to be able to spot a total solar eclipse. It is so cool, and I'm missing it, but John will see it. Parts of Iceland, northern Spain, northeastern Portugal will get the best view. Other parts of the world, including the northern U.S. and Canada, will get to see a partial eclipse. Tune in for our live coverage of the total solar eclipse. Beginning at 1 o'clock today, you'll see Brianna and Boris hanging out and checking this amazing planetary wonder out. All right. Not your typical senior fitness class. A group of seniors in Singapore are practicing something that makes me think I would break all my bones. They're practicing parkour to stay in shape. The class is aimed at teaching them how to fall and avoid injuries, but they're taking it to a very next level. The coach said his students have grown strength beyond what people their age typically do. John, a challenge to you. Shall we try this parkour stuff? Should we try it?
You know, I don't need an obstacle course to fall down. I can fall down on my very own with nothing in my way.
Literally, I have tripped across a set 1,000 times. There's even music for my tripping. Thank you, Brennan.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. So happening now, crews working to clear land for a controversial border security project in the Big Bend National Park in Texas. Customs and Border Protection says it is planning for almost 200 miles worth of patrol roads and detection technology. The sector accounted for just 1% of total border apprehensions in the last fiscal year, despite the fact it's a huge park. Local activists and park supporters say the project is disruptive to the protected lands and too expensive. With us now, Bob Krummenacher, who used to be the park superintendent and is now the chair of Keep Big Bend Wild. Thank you so much for being with us. You used to run this park. So what is it you are seeing right now and what worries you most?
Well, thank you, John. And first of all, the critical information is that inside the national park, we're looking at even fewer people crossing. It's less than 0.05% of all the crossings that are apprehended in the U.S.-Mexican border. But we're seeing right now pictures like these bulldozers, excavators, heavy equipment that are destroying riparian forest in the national park right near some of the most iconic views, like the one behind you in the picture there. So we are hearing from CBP that they are going to be very sensitive to the environment. They will use natural terrain wherever it exists. They will coordinate with locals. None of that is true. And so this is a betrayal of the United States government against its citizens who thought that they were setting aside one of the most beautiful and pristine and biologically important places in the United States.
How much transparency is there, which is to say, how much do you know about for sure that's being done, and how much is being kept from you and the public?
They have a website they call the Smart Wall. I don't tend to use that term because it doesn't seem that smart to me, but it's got a vague line. The work they're already doing is not even matching that line exactly. Their statements have been inconsistent. And so they claim great transparency, but there is virtually none at this point. You know, they have the authority to do what they're doing. We're not disputing that. But the need for it is highly disputable. Border sheriffs, county executives, politicians from across the aisle in Texas and wider than Texas are saying, stop, this does not make sense. Everybody here believes in border security. I've testified before Congress as the former superintendent saying border security is actually working in Big Bend National Park really well, great relationships with the Border Patrol. But this is driven by a one-size-fits-all strategy from Washington, unfortunately.
So how much of the work that's being done, and we continue to see pictures here, is something that could be repaired? How much of it would likely be permanent?
Well, where they're working right now is in a critical habitat for an endangered species, and we are just hoping that they don't drive that species out. It's the yellow-billed cuckoo, a rare bird. But this is a riparian forest, and it probably could recover if this is all they do. But they're already clearing land in other parts of the park. We think they're going to be building a border wall man camp. There's virtually no water in this park, so any wells that they drill will permanently reduce the groundwater. And there are other endangered species that depend on groundwater levels. The biggest threat is this risk that they are going to drive bulldozers and explosives across a 1,700-foot mountain that's above the river for no purpose at all. And that will be irreparable if they destroy that mountain.
Bob Krummenacher, thank you for shining a light on this. We get to see some very beautiful pictures there and raise questions about if it will remain beautiful for generations to come. Thank you for your time this morning. Brand new hour of CNN News Central.
Breaking this morning, a key economic number revealed. The cost of living in the U.S. is going down for the second month in a row. So why don't most Americans feel like they're getting some relief from high prices? Also this morning, the polls were deceptive. An upset in Wisconsin. We're expecting to hear soon from the projected winner of that state's very tight Democratic primary for governor. And growing anger after this video showing a state trooper punching an 18-year-old woman during an arrest. Kate is out today. I'm Sarah Seidner in Atlanta with John Berman in New York. This is CNN News Central.
All right, brand new economic data just in. The breaking news, the annual inflation rate slowed for the second month in a row, 3.4% in July. So the slowing is good. Not so good, it's still pretty elevated inflation right now. CNN senior reporter Matt Egan with the details we're seeing here.
Well, John, I think you nailed it, right? The cost of living did improve in July, and yet, yes, it does remain way too high. And yes, these price hikes continue to swallow up any sort of wage increases that workers are seeing. So 3.4%, as you mentioned, that's the new inflation rate on an annual basis. Touch better than the 3.5% the month before. This was exactly as expected. The monthly rate coming in at just 0.1%. That's a pretty benign figure. Also as expected. You can see the trend for monthly inflation in the last 2 years, all the way on the right side of the screen, those last two bars, right? In June, there was this major decline in prices, the biggest since COVID. And now in July, just a small increase. And yet, After back-to-back months of pretty subdued monthly inflation, when you look at the inflation rate on an annual basis, it's still way too high. That's what this chart shows you, right? 3.4%. Some context, John. That is above the 3% in early 2025 when President Trump started his second term. In fact, it's also higher than it was at this point last summer. So there really hasn't been much progress when it comes to inflation. And when we look at some of the drivers here, for the month of July, on a monthly basis, gas prices, they did go down almost 3%. So that was a major factor here. Of course, we now know that gas prices have gone back up because the Strait of Hormuz, despite what the president says, is not reopened. Now, grocery prices were only up very slightly, so that is encouraging. However, also another impact from the war is airfare, right? 2.2%. We know jet fuel has gotten dramatically more expensive because of the war, and we know airlines have not been shy about passing those costs along to consumers. Now, look at motor oil. That's an interesting one. 5.5% between June and July. And, you know, I had been reporting earlier this year about concerns about the supply chain and the Strait of Hormuz being closed and how that could cause a shortage or not enough supplies of motor oil. So you wonder if that is part of the factor for there. And then look at lettuce. Lettuce, a 16% plunge, the biggest on record, John. That does seem to reflect the fact that people are not buying as much lettuce because of all these concerns about contaminated lettuce.
I'm so glad you included that there, because sometimes you do learn a little something new with nuggets in these reports. Clearly, the Cyclospora outbreak is concerning people there, and just they're off lettuce, so the prices are dropping, supply and demand.
Absolutely. Just the last thing here is, what are people actually experiencing, right? So the good news is that wages, this orange line here, they are still going up. Wages are still going up. However, the problem is that prices are going up even faster. That's the blue line. So that means if you adjust your paycheck for inflation, your paycheck is actually getting smaller. And I think that this is the whole ballgame. This is why people feel so frustrated about this economy, because they're working hard, they're getting paid more, but they can't keep up with the prices.
And this is the stock market, which we just put up at the end there when we're going to talk about the lines on that rate there. When there is space between wages and inflation, that is where there is concern, because, as you said, they just can't keep up. And you see the markets up a little bit this morning.
Up a little bit, because I think that the market is thinking that the Fed may not feel as much pressure to raise interest rates. So the market is pleased with us.
All right, Madigan, thank you very much. Sarah.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Breaking this morning overnight, the wild governor's race in Wisconsin was finally called. We are expected to hear soon from David Crowley, the projected winner of that state's very tight Democratic primary. And we've just learned that Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong has called to concede to Crowley. Crowley is the moderate candidate in this race, and the results are raising some questions about whether the progressive movement, after a string of victories this summer, is starting to hit a wall as we get closer to November. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is live in Madison, Wisconsin. Wow, what are the major takeaways there? This was a tight one, and it went long.
Sarah, good morning. It certainly was tight, and I'm told that that concession call came in the overnight hours shortly after the race was projected for David Crowley. And Francesca Hong, the Democratic Socialist state lawmaker here, who really captured the imagination of so many progressives, had long said she believed the Democratic Party should unify, and she said she would campaign with her rival. I'm told a unity breakfast is scheduled for this morning here in Madison, and there is some unifying to do. There's no doubt about it. But the reality is this victory for David Crowley is such an extraordinary one. If you think back over the events of the last month, it was 1 month ago on July 8th when he got out of the race. He thought he did not have a path to victory. 10 days later, he got back into the race after a couple other leading candidates got out of the race. So this has been a wild race. But if you look at the outcome, and if you look at all the way down all the candidates, some of those candidates who were effectively not running, had abandoned their campaign, were still on the ballot. They got tens of thousands of votes. So that also played a role here. So as to the question of whether the progressive movement has hit a wall, she was asking Wisconsin voters to do something that no statewide candidate has done. A Democratic Socialist, a proud Democratic Socialist, she had to walk back some of her previous comments, like defunding the police. She said she no longer believed in that. It was kind of a string of one thing after another. So it's important, I think, that we look at each one of these these estates on its own. It's not just one progressive nationwide movement. And her candidacy was also not endorsed and supported by Bernie Sanders. He said he met her once a few years ago, but he was going to keep his eye on it. So that kind of gave you a sense of there were some questions about whether she was ready for a fall campaign. But Sarah, there is no doubt about it. I mean, this strain inside the Democratic Party, this really call for change is still very much alive. But here in Wisconsin, at least, here in the Midwest, the establishment had a very important victory last evening. And now, of course, David Crowley, as you said, he'll be speaking in the next hour. But we caught up with him on the eve of the election, and listen to what he said here about the progressive movement.
Just being able to put out different types of rhetoric doesn't mean you're a progressive. What makes you a progressive is actually making progress for those that you represent and looking to represent.
And he also pushed back on the idea that he was a member of the establishment. He said, look, I'm established. I'm the Milwaukee County executive here, which of course is a major position, one that former Republican Governor Scott Walker had before he became governor. But he clearly was campaigning on his results. So he'll be heading against Tom Tiffany, the Republican congressman, for November. Sarah?
It is fascinating to watch all of this, Jeff Zeleny, and we're not done yet with all these primaries. Do appreciate it. John?
All right, with us now, CNN senior political commentator Adam Kinzinger and Yemisi Egbawale, the former chief of staff to the Biden White House press office. Yemisi, I want to start with you here because you are the actual Democrat in this conversation. You said to me the other night that Francesca Hong was a fundamentally unserious candidate in Wisconsin, and that is what it looked like she would win. Now that she has lost, what does it tell you about what maybe Democratic voters have learned heading into November?
I think it tells us that moderates and independent voters want someone more towards the middle. And I also think that my assessment of her is something that people on the progressive side felt as well. I mean, look, when you look at Michigan, they had a slate of progressive stars that came out for Abdul, especially in those last key moments. And we know that he won within 1%. It was necessary for him to be boosted. But in Wisconsin, it felt like Francesca Hong was an island unto herself. I think it was pretty well known between voters and also those in the progressive establishment that this was not somebody that they wanted to get behind.
Adam Kinzinger, you were a congressman from Illinois, but you lived for a time in Wisconsin, quite a number of years. What does this say? Again, are obviously been some progressive victories, some victories on the far left of the Democratic Party. But what does this tell you maybe about the limits?
I think there are limits. I mean, look, here's the interesting thing. I've kind of posited that I feel like the Democrats are a little where we were in 2015, and they have a decision to make. In 2015, the establishment kind of had some wins, which, you know, I would call myself a member of that. And then all of a sudden, Trump comes along and, you know, we lose to the far right and the party becomes that. I feel like the Democrats are making that decision now. The interesting thing out of all this, and I see it out of Wisconsin, is I'll be interested in seeing, it seems like the college educated tend to maybe vote for Hong a little more, and it was like blue collar African American that voted for Crowley. So I wonder if there's a bit of a, not a split in the Democratic Party, but a difference of preference, and I think that played right could give the Democrats an opportunity to win the blue collar back from the Republicans.
Yeah, but talk to me a little bit about that. I wonder if we can put the map of Wisconsin up here, because county by county, if you look at all the cities in Wisconsin, Francesca Hong basically won every city. Every county where there was a city in Wisconsin, she won, except for Milwaukee, which is the hometown of David Crowley, and she did really well there. He barely beat her there. So we're talking about the city's higher education. You know, what can Democrats learn about maybe reaching those more rural working class voters outside those highly educated areas? And is David Crowley maybe teaching people how to do that?
Yeah, it seems to be the new mission of the Democratic Party to turn their attention back to working class rural voters. And time again, people that are progressive on the far left say that that is their bread and butter, that that their platform is working to represent that demographic. But we see that working class voters and black voters are still unconvinced. I think you really have to get back to local politics, and that's what David Crowley did very, very well in this primary race. He focused on the economic needs of people within Wisconsin. Look, Wisconsin has had a huge hit, especially in the agricultural sector, from the Trump administration tariffs. We're looking for new avenues to increase business. And I think the focus on the day-to-day lives, cost of living, affordability is the way to go here if you want to connect with black voters and if you want to get high turnout when it comes to working class voters as well.
So one other race I want to focus on with the two of you this morning is in Connecticut. This was for a House race in Connecticut where longtime incumbent John Larson, who had been in the House since 1999, was defeated in the Democratic primary by Luke Bronin, who had been the mayor of Hartford. I mean, not a nobody at all, well known in this district, but I think he's like the 7th Democratic incumbent to lose in the primaries. 10 incumbents total have lost in the primaries. So this is not a usual thing in a mid-cycle election. You don't see incumbents falling like this. So, Congressman, what does it tell you?
Very rarely. It's happening now, though. It tells me a couple things. First off, and I think this is part of the issue with where you're seeing the progressive base of the party rise. It's not that the Democrats want to go super far left. It's they want a fighter, and they feel like the people that have been there for a long time are just kind of getting by. If you are a congressman or woman that has been in Congress longer than 20 years, you're in trouble, and you could be. You don't get to live the rest of your life out as a congressperson nowadays. You have to have the energy to fight. And Larson, remember, he had an incident on the floor where he kind of froze up. People look at that and they're like, look, you don't have a right to this seat. It's our seat. I think that's what you're seeing is people just wanting people to step up and fight for them.
Yeah, but see, believe it or not, there's still primaries still to come in Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, with some Democratic incumbents facing primary challengers. How nervous should they be this morning?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about Ed Markey, I'm thinking about Seth Moulton, and we talk about age and people who have served for a very long time. Ed Markey's coming up against that as well, and he's pretty far left and a progressive. And I think the gerontocracy argument doesn't matter center or left. People are looking for fresh, bold, and sometimes younger ideas as well.
Adam Kingsbury, Yemisi Egbowale, great to see both of you. Thanks so much for coming in. Sarah?
All right, thank you, John. Up ahead, demands for answers after disturbing dash camera video shows a state trooper punching an 18-year-old woman and slamming her to the ground during an arrest. And testimony resuming soon in the trial of the mother accused of strangling her 3 young children. What we heard yesterday from a psychiatric nurse practitioner who treated Clancy. Plus, Marine veteran Robert Gilman is back on U.S. soil after being freed from Russian detention. What we've learned about his condition after his family feared he was near death. Those stories and more ahead. This morning, there are growing calls for answers after dash camera video captured an Arkansas state trooper slamming an 18-year-old woman to the ground and then punching her in the face. Alyssa Hackett was first pulled over for speeding and driving with her hazard lights on. According to the incident report, the trooper says that he moved to arrest her for having a bottle of liquor in her front passenger seat after another trooper said he had given her a verbal warning for alcohol possession during a separate traffic stop. A warning some may find this part of the video disturbing. Things appear to escalate, although you don't hear people yelling, you just see the escalation happen when Hackett questions why she's being arrested, and the trooper says that she ignored his commands. Well, she's now filing a federal civil rights complaint accusing him. You see the situation here where he slams her to the ground. It doesn't end there. You will see in just a second where he punches her in the face. CNN's Ryan Young has been following this and asking questions about what happened here. What are you learning this morning?
Yeah, when you watch that video and you look at it, you're trying to figure out why it escalated so much, right? Like, as we've watched the video a couple times ourselves today, you see her turn her body just to a certain direction and start trying to walk, but you don't see her physically trying to push back. Remember, she's about 5'1". The trooper's obviously bigger than she is. He does a lat drop, and that's obviously a throw to the ground there. She's shocked by that throw, and then he follows up with a punch. And not to hold anyone back from seeing this, just know that some of the video that you see might be disturbing.
If she got an attitude, take her to jail.
Okay. All right, we'll do that. Yeah, let me get your left hand real quick.
So what did I do?
Get your left hand real quick. Do not, look, do not resist. Do not resist.
I need to call mama.
No, stop.
But I didn't. What am I doing? Oh, no.
Stop. Turn around. Turn around. Turn around. Turn around.
Yeah, you can see that closed fist there. It almost didn't get the compliance that he wanted out of her at that point. If anything, it looks like it shocked her into being more defensive. And of course, she's calling for a mother. You hear her screaming over and over. Look, this has been shared all over social media right now. People are trying to figure out exactly what happened. Ben Crump has now been retained in this case. He's asking for there to be an investigation into his trooper. We know the trooper has not been suspended, but they are going to do an investigation in this case. But once again, you look at her size, you look at the struggle that she did put up just a little bit, but almost when you see him do the takedown, you're not sure why that follow-up blow needed to be applied there. At one point, he did pull his taser. He decided not to use it. She was taken into custody. And at this point, you could understand why they're in shock by this. But there's a lot of people wondering whether or not this amount of force needed to be used on someone of her size and in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the video, we were not there, but we can certainly see what's happening. And then you hear the screaming and the confusion. And there's always going to be a talk about training and how these officers are trained, because I think there are 2 officers there, right?
Well, you hear the back and forth, and I think a second officer arrives. But what's interesting about this, and we've watched a lot of these videos before, sometimes you can hear the escalation happen before it happens.
Yes.
In this case, was she complying all the way at certain points? You could argue whether or not there was a discussion there. But it wasn't something where you heard raised voices and you felt that fear of violence at that point. But obviously you saw how this ended, and that closed fist really did some damage in terms of just to her psyche, because you can hear her scream and her shock.
Yeah, it's hard to watch, especially listening to her screams there. There will be much more on this, I'm sure, as you watch and get more information on this particular case. It's good to see you, Ryan Young.
Good to see you as
Appreciate you. All right, John.
All right, happening now, the murder trial of Lindsay Clancy back underway in Massachusetts. The defense is focusing on the mental health treatment and medications that Clancy received in the months leading up to the killings of her 3 children. I want to get to CNN's Gene Casares, who has been covering this trial, all the twists and turns. What are you expecting today?
Well, today we have seen a line of providers, the actual medical professionals that treated Lindsay Clancy, that prescribed medication for her, and we'll see if they continue with that, because what we are seeing, practitioner after practitioner, is that Lindsay Clancy did not want to stay on the medications. Every time she went on a medication, she stopped it on her own, because she said, I'm getting worse. The symptoms are getting worse. It's a side effect of the medication. I cannot use it. Rebecca Gelada took the stand yesterday. She was a psychiatric nurse practitioner at a behavioral health center that really specialized in postpartum. And she testified that she started seeing her on November 29th, so this is about 2 months before Lindsay Clancy killed her children. At that time, she found that she was goal-oriented. She said she couldn't sleep. She was anxious. She was restless. She found that she had moderate depression at that point. And she prescribed Remeron, which she thought was something that would be good for her, a very low level. Lindsay Clancy had taken it for just a couple of days, and she said, no, I'm getting terrible side effects from this. I can't take this. Listen to what nurse practitioner Gelada right there engaged in conversation with Lindsay at the time. Listen to the testimony.
I explained to her that it takes time to work, that it has only been 4 days. So I did encourage her to give it some more time. I also made additional recommendations as well.
Okay, and so what were the recommendations for?
I had known that Julie had tried like 5 milligrams of Ambien, so I had suggested maybe we could try 10, maybe we could try Ambien controlled release formulation, because she was having these wake-ups in the middle of the night. The controlled release, kind of like the outer layer gives you 60% of the dose, helps you sleep. Then throughout the night, the inner layer gives you 40% of the dose, keeps you asleep. I said that might be a good option while we're waiting for the Remeron to work.
The defense brought out on cross-examination that during this time, the final 2 months, when she was seeing Nurse Gelada, when she was seeing her actual psychiatrist, Jennifer Tufts, that she also went to a Rhode Island hospital that specialized in women with postpartum issues. They refused to accept her, according to the defense in cross-examination, because she had been on too many medications. And the defense also said that Lindsay Clancy would stay up nights, 60, 70, 80 times a night. She would be searching medications of what could make her better.
All these new details. Gene Casares, thank you so much for this. And you can all follow Gene's coverage of the trial live on CNN All Access and on the CNN app. Sarah?
All right, thank you, John. Coming up, President Trump speaking out for the first time about that elaborate cloak and dagger plan that included him hiding in a catering truck to switch planes to protect him from a threat by Iran. What we are learning this morning. And the Chicago White Sox celebrates their most famous fan with a massive giveaway of Pope hats at last night's game. Wait till you see who threw out the first pitch.
All right, the breaking news out of Wisconsin this morning, a big upset. Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong has lost the Democratic gubernatorial primary there to David Crowley. There you can see it. The election results for you right on the screen there. David Crowley won by about 3,200 votes, or at least 3,200 votes ahead right now. Now, we just learned that Francesca Hong called David Crowley to concede this race. So the phone call has been placed. One of the big questions remaining is, can the party come together in that state to move forward toward the general election? We are expecting to hear from the winner of that primary, Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, very shortly, so stand by for that. With us now is Congressman Greg Stanton, a Democrat from Arizona. Congressman, good to see you. So another maybe surprising result as we march through these Democratic primaries. As you sit here on this Wednesday morning, what have you learned? What are Democratic voters saying around the country?
Well, I'm not sure it's so surprising that a well-respected county executive would win the primary for governor of Wisconsin. What it may say is the pollsters got it wrong, just like the pollsters got it wrong in Michigan recently as well, in that Michigan Senate race. So we're going to have to figure out how to fix our polling in America. But the fact that David Crowley, a very well-respected county executive, winning is not a surprise.
Are there limits to what voters will accept with the progressive movement, Democratic Socialists and the like?
Well, I just think in that case in Wisconsin, you had someone with a proven record. He was an experienced leader, a trusted leader in that community. I think that's what the voters responded to. Look, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, you've got to explain to voters what you're going to do when you get elected, how you're going to get it done, and use your experience to show that you know how to get it done. David Crowley had that story to tell, and I'm not sure his opponent did.
One other race that not closer to home geographically, but has to do with the House of Representatives where you work, which is that Connecticut incumbent John Larson, who's been in Congress since 1999. He lost in a Democratic primary there to Luke Bronin. There it is. You can see Luke Bronin really just crushed him in the primary for the first Democratic House district in Connecticut. I think he's the 7th Democratic incumbent to lose in a primary. You were primaried. You won your primary, but why are so many incumbents falling?
Well, the case in Connecticut, first off, John Larson is a legend of public service in Connecticut, and he has served that community well. This was more of a generational change. Luke Bronin is a very well-respected former mayor of Hartford. I'm a former mayor of Phoenix. Mayors tend to be popular candidates when you run for office because you've been able to show your passion, show what you want to get done in a nonpartisan environment. And Luke Bronin was a very well-respected leader in Hartford. And so I don't think that was an ideological race. It was just more of a generational change. But we respect John Larson. He's been outstanding service. What I do want to point out in the Midwest where we started is that, I'm chair of the New Dem Action Fund. We're trying to get moderates elected in the most competitive seats, including in districts that Trump had won. And we did it last night. Jake Johnson in Minnesota, a high school teacher, he won in a very competitive district. He's going to win that seat. Rebecca Cook in Wisconsin as well. She's going to beat an incumbent member of Congress. That's how we're going to win the general election. So the big news on election night is going to be Democrats winning the majority in the House of Representatives. And I know there's a lot of media about the ideological fights, but the truth is we're putting the right candidates in the right positions to win, and that's how we're going to win the majority this year.
Now, I didn't mean to suggest that what happened in Connecticut was ideological, by the way. Absolutely, it does appear to be generational, the desire for generational change. How much of that are you seeing around the country, especially some of these races you're talking about in the Midwest?
Well, look, I think the voters are saying they want people who are going to fight against Trump and the impact that Trump's policies had on increasing cost of living. affordability is the number one issue in this upcoming race. And people want to see whether you're a far left Democrat, a moderate Democrat, a more conservative Democrat, do you have the fight to take it to Trump? Because we have to lower healthcare costs. We have to lower costs on everyday goods by eliminating these tariffs. Gas prices is up for American families, working class families around the country. We have to fight to end this war in Iran, this war of choice that Trump has made. There's a direct line between increasing prices on the American people, the unaffordability of life in America, and Trump policies. I think voters are saying they want the toughest fighters in this critical fight across the country.
You mentioned you used to be a mayor yourself. You're also a former working lawyer. You've done a lot of lawyering, you know, in public and privately in your life. The Department of Justice put out a memo yesterday that has to deal with the idea of executive privilege going forward. And people look at this and say they might have done it to preempt Democrats taking over control of Congress when you might have subpoena power in just a few months. And they say the need for presidential confidentiality applies to communications with private advisors, just as it does with government officials. Essentially saying, you know, if the president talks to someone about an issue, that person isn't an elected official, isn't an appointed official, isn't a confirmed official, just, you know, maybe a businessman, maybe a friend. If that person is giving them advice, that is privileged information. How do you feel about that as someone who might have subpoena power in just a few months?
Look, Donald Trump is an authoritarian, and he's tried to take power away from Congress, power that belongs to Congress. Our founding fathers set up our government of equal branches, separation of powers. Sadly and tragically, for the last few years, Republicans have just rolled over and not defended their role in our constitutional system as members of Congress. They just rolled over and let the president take that power. The president may assume because of that he has this greater power. He does not. And we are going to win the majority. We're going to reestablish checks and balances in this country. Yes, we will have subpoena power, and we will use that very effectively to reestablish the constitutional norms in this country. The president is not an authoritarian. That's not what our country is. So despite what his lawyers may be saying, we're going to challenge that, as we should, because that's what the American people want. They want what our government to be run the way our founding fathers wanted it to be run, not in this authoritarian way that President Trump is trying to do in this country.
Congressman Greg Stanton, all the way from Arizona this morning. Thanks for getting up for us. I really appreciate it. All right, this morning, a Marine veteran is back in the U.S. after being freed from detention in Russia. What we know about how he was released. And Spotify lays out their plans for how they will label accounts that appear to be AI generated. All right, we learned that July 2026 was the hottest month on record in the United States. Very hot, causing a whole lot of problems. So the question is, will that become a political issue? How much do people care about that? How much do people care about climate change? Is it something they will vote on? CNN chief data analyst Harry Enten is here. Wow. It was hot. So is that going to drive decisions from voters?
You know, I was schwitzing a lot in the month of July, although granted, you know, I schwitz a lot all the time. But the bottom line when it comes to voters is, simply put, they don't care. They don't care. I mean, just look at these numbers. Okay, top issue, a midterm vote. You can list up the 3 issues. The economy, not surprisingly, comes in at number 1 at 54%. Immigration, 28%. Look where climate change is. It's tied for 14th. Tied for 14th, all the way down here at 3%. Johnny, I'm not the greatest mathematician in the world, but I sure as heck know that 54% is a whole heck of a lot higher than 3%. So despite the climate being so warm in the month of July, the hottest month on record here in the United States of America, the voters simply put do not say that climate change is going to be an issue in which they vote upon in the midterm election.
And how much people are concerned has been changing over time.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the other thing, which is, you know, how much concern is there when it comes over time? And you see this 3% here, and you can see these slides right here. Say climate change is a very big problem. In 2016, it was 40%. It was 40%. Look where we are in 2026. It's 39%. It's 39%. Now, Johnny B., you know, you're talking about change. where the change we have seen is partisanship, right? And what we can see is Republicans, more so than anybody else, have been shifting away from the idea that climate change is a top issue for them. Take a look at this. The least important issue for Republicans, it's just at 14% in terms of saying that climate change is a very big problem. So we're seeing a large partisan split, but when it comes together, Democrats are going in one direction, Republicans are going in another direction. But when you put those two together, the bottom line is we're only talking about 2 in 5 Americans, both now and 10 years ago, saying that climate change is a very big problem.
This is an all-New York accent hit, I'm noticing this time. You're leaning into that.
I'm leaning into it.
Because it was hot in July in New York.
Yes.
So to what extent do people blame, human activity for this?
So you see this 40%, you see this 39%. Now I really am leaning into the New York accent. Say it's humans causing the earth to warm. Look at this. In 2016, it was 45%. Now it's 48%. Again, no real shift that's going on here as opposed to saying there's no warming or it's natural.
And in terms of what the prediction markets are saying about how hot it will be this year.
It's going to be hot, Johnny B. Some like it hot. Look at this. Okay, chance that 2026 will be the world's hottest year. Look at that. In July 12th, about a month ago, it was 24%. Now 65% in the Kalshi prediction markets. So quite hot indeed, but Americans simply put, they don't care about climate change.
We're going to go look for that R in the word percent to see if we can find it by tomorrow. Harriet, and thank you very much. A lot of news this morning. We'll be right back.
It's the end of an era for a small Florida business that's been outfitting the legendary Blue Angels for almost 50 years. According to the Stars and Stripes, the Navy scrapped its deal with the Sewing Box earlier this year. The tailoring shop is just minutes from the Blue Angels' home base in Pensacola, Florida. But instead, the Navy is switching to the Virginia-based Aquila International, a contract that ends up being worth almost double what they had been paying the Sewing Box since 2008. And now there's a big question. What happens to the ceremonial suit design? We've reached out to the U.S. Navy and the Blue Angels for comment. We have not yet heard back. But today, joining me now is Miss Candy Whitehurst and her husband, Ronnie, the owners of the Sewing Box, and their newly hired attorney, Joe Zarzor. Thank you all for being here. Miss Whitehurst, I want to start with you. Do you have any idea why you were right across the street, why they took away your contract after all these decades of work that you've done for the Blue Angels, who were clearly happy with it?
I have no idea. They never said anything to me as if they didn't want me. And I have text messages where the guys were saying, oh, this is the best suit I ever had, right before I found out. Oh, it fits so perfect. I mean, I can just show you images and tell you stories where they was just in here praising me. So why they took this initiative, I do not know. But I just wish they would have had a conversation with me beforehand. And if you had a problem, I felt like they should have came to me, because I was loyal to them. As me and my husband, as this business, we was loyal to them, and we did everything we could to please them. So I just don't know where the downfall went, except for maybe with the little confrontation with one of the officers. But other than that, I have no idea. And even him himself, which is the suppo, he even was just in here praising me. So I do not understand. But I would love to get people to understand this part. What they are doing, it's a difference in manufacturing and custom. Manufacturing is small, medium, large, extra large, double X. Custom is totally built just for that person's body. I have these patterns that we make just for them. Nobody else can wear this but Brandon Wilkins. This is his pattern. It belongs to him. So I just don't believe, Virginia, you can go in that shop at any time and see a special pattern drawn up just for that person.
Yeah,
and
that's important because of what they do and the speeds that they go. Everything needs to fit just right, as I understand it. I just want to ask the both of you, you and your husband, what this is going to mean, what this loss is going to mean for your shop, but also for the community there near the base who relied on you for good, honest work.
Right now, I must say, the city of Pensacola and around the country, everybody have been so supportive, my family, but the city of Pensacola, they have stood with me because they don't understand. I hired 4 extra people where that money is generating back into our city, and the way we care so much about them and the way we support them here in Pensacola, I would have never thought they would do this, not only to me, but to our city.
To your community.
And it's heart-wrenching. And I do get a little emotional, so.
I know it, and I'm
like
sorry.
To make a comment. When you say Blue Angels, you think. Yeah, I would like to make a comment. When you say Blue Angels, you think excitement, you think joy. They bring joy to the city. They bring joy to kids' hearts. Even my wife, I think sometimes she loves the Blues more than she loves me with the amount of hours that she spends here getting this Blues uniform perfect. But she brings joy to the Blue Angels. So the Blue Angels is about family, but somehow the Blue Angels and the Sewing Box, well, let's say this, the Sewing Box family has been relieved from family of the Blue Angels. And we just want clarity.
Yeah, I know it's hard, and I see the tears forming in your eyes, and I'm so sorry, Ms. Whitehurst, that this is so painful for you and your employees and your husband and all the work you've done for a half a century. I do want to quickly, we've got about 30 seconds or less, Joe, to your attorney. We know that the president has given no contract bids to people he knows, like the ones for the company who did the botched reflecting pool work. Do you have an answer as to why the government decided to pay so much more for a product that they were getting for about half the price, which was ultimately would have saved taxpayers money?
All I can tell you is this. First, let me start by saying that Pensacola is the Blue Angels, right? You can't do any kind of search online and look up anything about Pensacola without seeing the Blue Angels. And all of us love the Blue Angels. And so I think this is more about a supply officer got a little bit sideways with the Sewing Box over one particular uniform and decided they were going to do something to the Sewing Box. And I don't think politics has anything to do with it, to be honest. I think this has to do with a supply officer deciding he's going to take it out, his frustration about one particular uniform, he's going to take it out on 40 years plus of a business relationship. And it's more like a divorce for us because we're married to the Blue Angels in Pensacola. They are part of who we are. And to rip that out from us and to send it off to some other state that has no connection to the Blue Angels, is devastating to our, in my opinion, to our business community and to the Sewing Box. So,
Joe, thank you so much.
We
are running out of time
to see if we can undo this.
I know you're going to do that, and we'll be watching and we'll stay in touch with you. Thank you to the Whitehurst. We really appreciate you talking to us, and I'm sorry you got so emotional this morning. Try to have a better day today. Thank you so much. All right, thank you for joining us. This is CNN News Central. Sit Room up next.